all this happened. So I don't think I'll be able to add much to that. What I do want to talk about the fact that when people say this may not happen again, I just want to, I can see it clearly, and that is what I want to concentrate the next 15 odd minutes is that if we go on like this, it will happen again. And I can see it with certainty because you can be uncertain about the fact that if things happen illegally, you can fight. If an invader comes, you can fight the invader. We are strong enough to defend ourselves. But what if the fight is happening legally? You can't fight anyone. You can't defend yourself against anyone because the enemy is saying away those tools. So here I am, and I'm not just going to conquer Somnath, I'm going to conquer the entire country, and you will allow me to do it. So I want to talk a little bit about that while we are obviously more aware, as people keep saying, कि देखो मोदी आया तो कम से कम ये फायदा तो है कि अब हम सब ये जानने लगे हैं. Great, that is a fact. But I want to talk about the other fact, which is profoundly disturbing if you were to look at the specifics of it. Let me start with Somnath itself. And at the risk of repeating myself, which I always say, that I'm always invited only once to any gathering. But because my brother has invited me, I might be invited again. I'm not very sure about what I'm going to say now, the repercussions of it. But in one sense, Somnath escapes my ire because it's a board that is not controlled by the government. The temple Somnath itself is not controlled by the government. So there, please rest assured that my anger is not directed against the board. But the fact of the matter is that you have the state controlling more than 110,000 Hindu temples along the length and breadth of this country. And you could be pardoned by saying that, yes, Congress passed the legislation, Congress overturned a Supreme Court diktat to maintain their stronghold on Hindu temples and thus on Hindu land, on Hindu property, on Hindu temple wealth, and have used it with gay abandon. But then what explains the fact that under a Hindutva government, more temples are under state control? And specifically, you want to talk about states, my state, Tamil Nadu, you have Vikram state, Karnataka. Together, they control about 70,000 temples, maybe in excess of that. Gujarat controls, if I'm not mistaken, 245 Hindu temples, not Somnath. But here is the thing, that still we are so blasé and oblivious about it that we have the Somnath Temple Board. And Prime Minister is the head of that board. Now you can say, yes, the Prime Minister is a bona fide, self-proclaimed, self-proud Hindu, Modi ji, so we have no problem. But then tomorrow, you may have Stalin come in as the Prime Minister. We nearly had Sonia Gandhi become the Prime Minister. It was only that she refused, that she wasn't the Prime Minister of India. Had she not refused, Somnath Temple Board would have been under Sonia Gandhi. So we haven't set in stone the laws that will block people exploiting Hindus, conquering Hindus, and conquering Hinduism. We haven't done that. We are always reactive. We are living the moment, feeling that, yes, Modi ji would never try and exploit Somnath. We aren't thinking that 1,000 miles down or, maybe 500 miles on the east, there was a guy who attended a conference that was organized by the Sanatan board, where he proclaimed that Sanatan Dharma has to be eradicated. He is controlling 40,000 temples. So, we need to recognize the fact that the destruction of Hindus and Hinduism is just a matter of a breath away. It has not gone, it has strengthened because we've legalized it. We have made constitutional amendments that are protecting, literally protecting the exploitation of Hindus and Hinduism. And it's all legal. I'll end by giving you 3 or 4 examples, but I don't want to talk much because I want this seed to be implanted in your mind that we, far from being safe now, we are at our gravest danger, because what lurks is not an illegal act by an invader. What lurks is a legal act by an insider. The illegality has been replaced by legality, and the invader has been replaced by insider. Now I ask you, what is more dangerous? Of course, the latter. Let me give you a couple of examples. How on earth is it possible that in the last 10 years, Waqf has claimed 20 lakh acres of land? 20 lakh acres. I think after the Indian government and the railways, it is Indian government and defense and the railways, it is now the 3rd largest landowner. This has happened during the Modi rule. It has happened legally. And why has it happened? Because there is a Waqf Act that has weaponized the Waqf board. I have nothing against Waqf board. Why should anybody have anything against Waqf board? I can start a board tomorrow if I want. Somnath ji has a board. Vikram can start a board. Thousands of companies have a board. But the problem comes when you concretize and constitutionalize an act that is like a parallel government. It has its own tribunal, judiciary. It has its own executive. It has its own legislature. It's a country within a country. Now, I have a board and I say that, look, this auditorium is my property. What would be the owners of the auditorium do? The owners would go to court. That is how property disputes around the world are settled, board or no board. Right thing to do. But if Waqf were to say that this auditorium is my, I don't know, it might actually be the property. You never know. I was in the studio at times now and I said, Navika, we're talking about Waqf. This might be Waqf land. It turned out to be, the studio was on Waqf land. I had to beat a hasty retreat. So I don't know. But the fact is, if the owners of the auditorium protest and say, no, we'll go to court, the guys would say, you can't go to court. You have to come to the Waqf tribunal. And there, the majority are the Muslims who are ruling, acting as judges. And they will take years. And the decision they will come to is that, yes, indeed, this land belongs to Waqf. They claimed a 1500-year-old temple to be belonging on Islamic land when Islam is only 1300 years old. How on earth are these things possible? But it's all legal. Now, the government had a great chance to abrogate the Waqf Act. They didn't abrogate the Waqf Act. They amended the Waqf Act. First of all, why the hell should an act exist? Why board should exist, but why do you need an act to weaponize the board? Now, a lot of those draconian amendments that were there in the Waqf Act are there in the amended Waqf Act as well. For example, the state, you, me, taxpayers' money will be used, given to Waqf to conduct a survey. That violates the articles of our constitution, supposedly a secular constitution. The state is paying from its coffer, from its exchequer, for a religious purpose. There are so many other acts like that, draconian clauses, that still exist. So I'm just resigned to the fact that we no longer have the guts or the fearlessness or to do the right thing to remove discrimination that is happening against the Hindus. So the next best thing is, bhaiya, you have that discrimination amongst everyone else. If you cannot abrogate the Waqf Act, bring in a Sanatan Act. And then me, you, Vikram, somebody will say that Jama Masjid is on Sanatan land. Actually, every mosque is on Sanatan land technically. But then the Maulvi will say, this is preposterous. I will go to the court. And we'll say, no, sorry, you can't go to the court. come to the Sanatan tribunal, just like we are forced to go to the Waqf tribunal. And there we will take years and we will conclude that indeed, we already know the conclusion, that Jama Masjid is on Sanatan land. Then you can go to the court. How would they feel then? But Hindus are completely silent. Supreme Court is completely silent. This government is completely silent. 20 lakh acres. You know who are protesting now? Christians are protesting. 700 churches were locked. Their people came onto the streets in Kerala to protest against Waqf. Christians are more worried about love jihad than Hindus now. But as long as Hindus were suffering, nobody cared. I'll give you another example where constitutionally Hinduism is being attacked, chiseled at. The Right to Education Act. Now, on its own, it's a very noble thing. Every child must have a right to education. Great. But then comes its conjunction with the 93rd Amendment, and suddenly only Hindu-run schools have the obligation to give 25% seats to economically weaker section. Muslim-run schools and Christian-run schools don't. And as a result, tens of thousands of only Hindu-run schools have been shut down. The worst sufferers are in Maharashtra. This has happened in the last 12 years. Can you say this is happening under the Congress? Not anymore. So now I say, well, if you are morally and ethically for uplifting the poorer people of the country, then let us have the Muslim-run schools and Christian-run schools also be under an obligation to give 25% seats. That, oh my God, no, you can't do that. No, that's discrimination. What the hell is this then? And you know what is going to happen after 10, 15 years? Because obviously parents want their kids to be going to school. And if you shut down a Hindu-run school, the Hindu parents would send them to the other school. And there, either subtly or in your face, there would be proselytization, there would be conversion. And then one day you would find that your kids turned into a quote-unquote minority. And then what would you say? Look what has happened in this country. People are converting. You know, this cannot be allowed to happen. You allowed this to happen. Tell me any other country where the majority population are refugees in that country. Tell me. Is it a joke? Are there Germans who are refugees in Germany? Why are 7 lakh Hindus, Kashmiri Hindus, refugees in this country? Why have we rehabilitated only 5,000 Kashmiri Hindus in Jammu and Kashmir, where in the same Jammu and Kashmir, 45,000 Rohingyas have been rehabilitated? Now, whose fault is it? Unless we realize that it is a sin to promulgate a draconian discriminatory act, but it is also a sin, perhaps a greater sin, to continue with that act. Yes, you are culpable if you come up with an evil design. But are you escaping culpability if you continue with that? No, I'm sorry, you're not. In my book, you're not. Let me give you another example. Places of Worship Act. It was in the discussion, it came out that Sitaram Goelji has written 2 books, in fact, where at least 1800 authoritatively he has documented temples that were destroyed and on whose edifice or foundation you have mosques. At least 1800. Vikram, Sai, others have said the figure could be as high as 40,000. How is it still a democracy in this country when I, as a Hindu, cannot even approach the courts to reclaim my demolished place of worship? Because the Places of Worship Act exists. Now you can say it was disgusting of the Congress to have promulgated it in 1990, I think 5 it was. But then in the last 12 years, how does it continue? How is it that Hindus can still not knock the doors of justice if you have violation of the Amara Act and the Place of Worship Act. Yes, we can talk about Somnath and how we have reclaimed it, how we have rebuilt it. But then go a few thousand miles up, Krishna Janmasthan. You can see the mosque on top of the Kashi Vishwanath. Vikram's written an amazing book. The heart bleeds. You can see there is no, at least in the Ram Janambhumi case, there was a to and fro, academic to and fro. Did the Ram temple exist? Did it not? यहाँ तो आपको मंदिर दिख रहा है. You can see the pillars. And yet, you cannot even approach the court on so many other cases. All this is happening legally. And that is what I'm trying to tell you. I'll end there with this seed that our destruction is certain, because now it is no longer an outsider, it is an insider, and it is no longer illegal, it is all legal. Thank you so much. Any questions? Please feel free. Ma'am.
See, what you're saying is very alarming, but very true at the same time. And that actually what comes to heartbleeds. The question arises here is, since 1947 to 1950, there was no constitution. So we were not secular, declared secular. We were run by the British rules till 1950, or that a small book which was synthesized to Indian circumstances. Even then, we allowed our armies to be regimentalized. We allowed our states to be named on languages. We allowed ourselves to be called secular, though the country was divided on the basis of religion, and no one had the guts to say that that religion is not ours. So the pertinent questions still prevail. If we keep mum at 14th August 1947, all those officers who were serving the British, on 15th August they became Indian. Do we really treat them, for working for the country? The question is, they are working. They are the people who are designing. They are the people whose mindset is typically colonized even today. So unless we design the basic designers, we would keep on blaming and claiming.
Yes, absolutely. And you're very true. Very right, ma'am. But as you know, the word secularism did not exist in our constitution until Indira Gandhi inserted it. That was 30 years later, after independence. And it has remained still. Look, I have no problem in India being a secular state. I really don't. I would love it. I truly believe in the functioning of the state, religion should not play a role, and vice versa. But we are not a secular state. Why don't we control mosques? Why are we controlling Hindu temples? How can a secular state control Hindu temples? How can a secular state give Hajj subsidies? How can a secular state give monthly salaries to thousands of imams, host grand iftar parties? These are not signs of a state being away from religion. They are signs that the state is completely embedded in religion. So, I think it's just, I don't know whether we've blindfolded or we're wearing blinds. We are completely unaware of the tsunami that's coming our way. And as I say, Hindu candle is being burnt at both ends. On one end is the discrimination, and on the other hand is the appeasement of the minority community, which has started from welfare, which the Hindus didn't mind. ठीक है, you have schemes. One prime minister even said the first right or claim of resources, fine. Then it turned to wokefare, and now it is warfare. You're actually letting off terrorists. It happened in Hubli in Karnataka. You letting off the Coimbatore bombers, and not just letting them off, saying the Muslim community should be proud. Let them not say that we don't work for them. we are releasing terrorists, let them not say we're not working for them, as if releasing terrorists was working for the Muslim community. This is the thought. So, it's just a situation that is, I don't know what to say. It's a one-way track. Yeah.
What developments would help you revise your position? Obviously, you've taken a position which is very extreme in the sense that it's a certainty.
Yes.
Have there been any developments that made you calibrate, or what would be those developments that will help you calibrate? That's one. And second, a lot of recent contestations that we've seen within the Hindu fold have to do with the social engineering. So how do you think that is contributing to the lack of unity or the danger that you talk about?
That's doubling the danger. But I'll come to that. But the answer to the first is absolutely no. In fact, we're going in the other direction. I don't see any change that can ebb our descent. No change whatsoever.
What would that be?
The change?
Yeah.
So number one,
for us to work towards.
Yes. So the first would be whatever discrimination is happening constitutionally, legally against the Hindus, either remove it on day zero, or you put the same discrimination on every other community. So if you have a Waqf Act, you can't remove it. You bring in a Sanatan Act. If you cannot remove state control over Hindu temples, you put state control over mosques and churches. If you cannot remove 25% obligation for reservations only on Hindu-run schools, you put that obligation on Muslim-run schools and Christian-run schools. And the other thing is that should have happened on day zero. Make sure that all displaced Kashmiri Hindus are taken home. So why is there less violence and riots in a place that was known for it, Uttar Pradesh? You have to ask that question. What is it that Yogi does that others are not doing? There is Supreme Court. So if there is anything illegal that he does, he can be pulled up. Has he ever been pulled up? No. Obviously, he is sending out a message that don't test our patience. Don't indulge in illegality. If you do, this is what you'll get. I think we've forgotten to give that message. And I keep saying, this is not a Hindu issue. This is a justice issue. All these things are injustices that are being done. If this was being done against Parsis or Christians or Muslims, I would have stood with them. If tomorrow a Muslim says my mosque was demolished, 200, 300 years ago, and a king built a Hindu temple on it, and I demand that my mosque be given back to me, I would stand with him in the courts. Please investigate this. But yahan to Hindus can't even go to the court. So these are all not matters of Hindus at all. This is a matter of discrimination being done. And discrimination is always religion agnostic. You are directing it against one religion, but generally to cry for justice does not bring religion in at all. Yeah. And the second thing, of course, they're like just pressing on the wound. And I think that's really dangerous. Absolutely. Yeah. Please. I'm so relieved. First time there are people from JNU in the audience and they're not heckling me.
Hello. So I'm not an academic, just clarifying that. So like ma'am mentioned about secularism and the word was put in later. So right now, I think there's a surge of posts on Instagram that say ki Bharat will soon become a Hindu Rashtra. And you have those maps and Akhanda Bharat. So my question is that now that we have that map of Akhanda Bharat where they include Bangladesh, Pakistan. So if indeed it does happen, what would that effect look like in person in society, and how would it matter to common Hindus who are not running the government or just existing? So what difference would that bring in their life according to you?
Yeah, first of all, I don't want Akhand Bharat at all. I mean, every morning I get up and I thank the father of my nation, Jinnah, for being there, Pakistan divide kar diya. Thank God those guys are not in India. I mean, can you imagine if Pakistan, 300 million Pakistanis were part of India? I mean, yeah, so thank you, Jinnah. He is father of my nation. But to come back to the question that you ask, we need to find out what would entail in a Hindu Rashtra that is so different from what it is today. How would the constitution be different? If it would be less discriminatory towards Hindus, then yes, I want that constitution. Because right now, this constitution is patently discriminatory against Hindus. And Hindus aren't doing anything about it. So yeah, I mean, I want a Hindu Rashtra where there is no discrimination against Hindus. Yeah, absolutely.
Considering you chaired a session on Shatrubodh and so on, and also considering that you're an ardent disciple of Zakir Naik, who's yes, and that aspect of your discipleship shows up in news channels where you rattle out chapter and verse, very candidly, and you've always also stood for, in the face of everything that happened to people like Nupur Sharma and others, at the cost of being called Islamophobic.
Yeah.
So, what is your prescription for people that do we also become thereby, your disciples and thereby of Zakir Naik and actually start quoting these chapters and verse, or do we really value our head lying firmly on our torso? How do you think people of our generation need to deal with this issue of talking candidly with Shatrubodh?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me answer it in two ways. Number one, as I said, I don't want the Bhagavad Gita to be prescribed in schools and our children reading it. I want Quran to be prescribed in schools, not Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita tells you what you have to do, Quran tells you what will be done to you. So that is why Zakir Naik will forever remain my guru. And you know something? Muslims in India hate Zakir Naik more than Hindus. Think about it. Why? Because he exposes them. I am not Islamophobic. I don't fear Islam. What is there to fear about Islam? Islam is absolutely blunt and forthright in what it says should be done to me. Why should I fear it? I know it. The Muslims fear it because they don't want the real Islam to be known to you, to me, to us, to them. They are the ones who fear Islam. They are the ones who are Islamophobic, not us. The fact of the matter is everything is written, and you no longer have the excuse of saying, oh, it was written for the kafirs of that era. So every punishment in Quran is for kafirs, but kafirs of that era. But every great prescription is for 2 billion Muslims and not for Muslims of that era. Everything good is for 8 billion people. And everything bad written there that must be done to people is only for those 100 odd people. It doesn't work that way. You can say it works that way, fine, but you can't stop me from quoting the book. And honestly, Vikram, we have reached that stage because I believe strength has to be feared before it is demonstrated. And we are a cowardly nation, starting from the very top. You still don't have the Prime Minister who condemned what happened to Nupur. He should have asked a simple question that all of us were crying hoarse, asking, what wrong should she do? She quoted an Islamic scripture. Are you telling me that we can't quote Islamic scripture? And now, with the advent of Grok, my tweet still exists where I've quoted that Islamic scripture. And people are always asking Grok, and Grok gives you exactly that chapter and verse. Now, are you going to kill Grok? Are you going to behead artificial intelligence after having already beheaded intelligence? Fact of the matter is, you need somebody at the top telling you, stop this right now. but it's going in the other direction. The people at the top are offering chadars to people who said we take great joy in destroying temples. A remark was said rightly against St. Francis Xavier, and that fellow was arrested. He was on the run or wherever. They arrested his brother. BJP, police under the BJP. And you read what Francis Xavier said about Hindus and Hinduism, your skin will crawl. You had Khusrao being eulogized by the Prime Minister. You read what his forced conversion verses are. Where does it end? You know, all our tyrants have been made into heroes by us Hindus, and vice versa. And unless that changes, unless that fear into people who are doing things wrongly, who are reading things wrongly, until that happens, things are not going to be corrected. And that cannot happen by me, you, we can have hundreds of these symposiums. We've had them before. People have written books. Sitaram Goyalji, there was a Quran petition, everyone. But the strength has to be demonstrated by the people on the top. They have to say, this is wrong. They are not saying that, Vikram. That's the problem. Thank you. I hope I could be called again. I don't know, on the 150th anniversary or so. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ranganathan. I think it was truly an awakening session to engage with you. We will now move on to our third session, Modern India and Somnath. I now invite session chair, Dr. Gupta, and speakers, Dr. Neha Rawal, Parika Rathod, and Dr. Soumya Nagar to the stage. जय सोमनाथ। यहाँ पे बैठे सभी प्रबुद्ध जनों को प्रणाम करते हुए हमारा जो कार्य है उसको प्रेजेंट करने जा रही हूँ। I feel privileged to present the work of K.M. Munshi ji as being a part of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavans. Some temples are made up of a stone, but some are rebuilt from the soul of a nation. The story of Kanhaiyalal Munshi ji and Somnath Temple is one such story of reclaiming civilizational voice. Next, please. So our study is based on some of the major points. The first one is based on the modern national milestone. The reconstruction marks a pivotal moment in modern Hindu history and post-independent India. The reconstruction of Somnath Temple after the multiple attacks invasion by the Islamic colonizers spanning centuries is a civilizational wound that India continued to carry until the temple was restored in 1951. And these attacks intended to rob Hindu of their sense of self, culture, dignity, and honor. In this context, the reconstruction of Somnath Temple in Prabhas Patan is a milestone in modern history and post-independent India. At the forefront of this massive monumental effort, along with Sardar Patel and N.V. Gadgil, was Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi. He is often remembered for his educational and cultural vision for Bharat. his role in the Constituent Assembly, contribution to the public life, and a doyen of Gujarati literature. He was the driving force behind rebuilding Somnath Temple at a crucial time in India's political history. Along with him, some leaders and political figures who contributed to the rebuilding of Somnath Temple were V.P. Menon, M.K. Gandhi, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Samaldas Gandhi, and now Somnath also nurtured imagination of Munshi Ji as a writer and a thinker. The cry of Gujarati pride, Jai Somnath, inspired Munshi Ji's writing and energized, guiding his literary work towards independence. Munshi's participation in reconstruction of Somnath was not without challenges. He was faced with the might of secular Indian state, which had decided to go out of his ways to protect minority rights. But Munshi stood tall, and as a public figure, as a writer, as an intellectual, and as a freedom fighter, and a man of action, to ensure that despite Nehru's displeasure, rebuilding of the temple continued. With reference to Kanhaiyalal Munshi's civilisational vision, it offers a rich framework for contemporary moment of temple reclamation. If we consider Somnath in Munshi Ji's writing, so a particularly significant dimensions of Munshi Ji's writing is his contribution towards the efforts to embed Somnath within a broader framework of Indic consciousness. Through his writing, especially Somnath, the Eternal Shrine, he articulated a vision in which the temple symbolized not just a pilgrimage, but the very idea of Bharat's civilisational freedom. He argued that every attack on the Somnath represents the assault on that freedom, and that reconstruction of the temple signifies re-establishment of cultural dignity. This, at the core of Munshi Ji's contribution, was his insistence on grounding the reconstruction of temple based on rigorous historical and archaeological inquiry. With reference to that, his collaboration with B.K. Thapar was crucial in this regard. Through this work, Munshi Ji was able to reconstruct the layered history of Somnath and revealing that it was not just a single temple, but a succession of temples built, destroyed, and again rebuilt over the centuries. Munshi was also able to reconstruct the broader history of Gujarat and its socio-political transformations over the period of time. As a prolific writer, Munshi Ji contributed in English, Gujarati, and Hindi literature. By writing historical novels, stories, dramas, and biographies. His celebrated work, Somnath, the Shrine Eternal, and Jai Somnath mirrors his aspiration for a cultural renaissance in independent India. While Somnath, the Eternal Shrine, provides historical and archaeological details about the significance of Somnath in Gujarat, Jai Somnath is a historical novel which narrates Gujarat's resistance against Muhammad Ghazni's attack on Somnath temple during 11th century. So these are the monumental work by K.M. Munshi Ji. Jai Somnath is the historical novel written in Gujarati, and the book that provides archaeological details about the Somnath temple is Somnath, the Shrine Eternal. Yeah, next please. The story of Jai Somnath adopts the approach of new historicism. which this framework highlights the interplay between history and literature. This framework doesn't approach history just as an objective collection of facts, but it is based on the subjective narratives that are created by people around that event for that specific period of time. So in Jai Somnath, Munshi Ji has intrinsically curated the story around the political, spiritual and social realities of 11th century. The absence of reference of Muhammad Ghazni's raid in Gujarat, erasures of historic resistance of regional kings under the leadership of King Bhimdev of Anhinwal Patan, and perceived inadequacies in the accounts provided by Islamic sources are among some of the reasons that inspired Munshi Ji to write this novel. Through the incidences and dialogues between the various characters in this novel, Munshi Ji seeks to capture the prevalent sentiment of people towards Somnath during Ghazni's attack. So Jai Somnath, the historical novel, opens with describing how Somnath occupied a significant place in the people of significant place in the consciousness of people as a guardian deity of Prabhas. So people from various parts of India across the different social class traveled through different routes towards Somnath with the single-minded objective, the darshan of Lord Somnath. And Munshi Ji has articulated this collective spiritual devotion in the following phrase. Somnath no શિવાલય નહોતું આલય, નહોતું શહેર અને નહોતો સ્વસ્થ પ્રદેશ. સદીઓની શ્રદ્ધાએ એને દેવભૂમિ સમૂહ સમૃદ્ધ અને મોક્ષદાયી બનાવી મૂક્યું હતું. Which can translate it to, the temple of Somnath was not merely a shrine. It was not a big city, or it was not even a very prosperous land. Centuries of devotion had transformed it into the divine land, prosperous and spiritually liberated. Jai Somnath. Yeah, next please. So as some of the previous researcher has also mentioned, the story of Jai Somnath revolves around the presiding authority of Pasupata cult named Ganga Sarvagna, the temple dancer Chola, King Bhimdev of Anhilwar Patan, Rajput King Sajjan Chauhan and Samant Chauhan. Munshi Ji vividly portrays how the life philosophy of each of these characters revolve around their faith in Lord Somnath. Chola, the temple dancer, is a reverent devotee of Somnath and regards her dance as an offering of prayer. So in Munshi Ji's word, જીવન ભર નૃત્ય કરવું, જય સોમનાથની ઘોષણા સાથે દેવના ગર્ભદ્વાર આગળ પ્રાણ છોડવો, એનાથી વધારે સુંદર પરાકાષ્ઠા એની કલ્પનામાં ન હતી. To dance for the whole life and breathe her last while dancing for Lord Somnatha was her only desire. She could not imagine anything better than that. Munshi Ji has also narrated resilience by Rajput kings. When Bhimdev, the king of Anhilwal Patan, resolved to defend Somnath by assembling his force to Prabhat, kings across the Gujarat joined him to protect the supreme Lord Somnath, which Munshi Ji has mentioned as Bhagwan Somnathનું સંરક્ષણ દ્વારિકાથી વાંસવાડા અને દમણથી આબુ સુધી દરેકને માટે પરમ મનોરથ બની રહ્યું હતું. Protecting the shrine of Somnath was the only objective of kings from Dwarika to Vanswada and from Daman to Abu. So all the kings were got united under the leadership of Bhimadeva. Yes, next. Munshi has also described the sacred resolve, the characters in the novel, those who resolve to protect the shrine until their last breath. Gang Sarvagna, the major priest of the temple, he said, એમાં શંકાને સ્થાન કે વિચારને સ્થાન નથી. દેવ અને મલેચ્છ વચ્ચે કોઈ માડીનો જાયો ઊભો ન રહીએ તો હું વૃદ્ધ ઊભો રહીશ, હું એકલો ઊભો રહીશ. જોઈએ છે શું થાય છે. પિનાક પાણીના પ્રાબલ્યને કોણ રોકી શક્યું છે? If there is nobody to stand between me and Lord Shiva, I alone will stand and I'll try to protect my deity. Even King Bhimadeva, who tries to defend Prabhasa, he said, what should we do then? Go Brahman Pratipad, આપણી ભૂમિને ખૂંદવા ઈચ્છે છે. આપણા ઈષ્ટદેવના સંરક્ષણ માટે પ્રાણ ના આપીએ તો શું કરી શકીએ? Which says, if the invader wants to plunder our land, should we not stop him? Should we not give our life to protect our land? Being a false Jyotirlinga out of twin of Lord Shiva, the significance of Somnath is not only limited to its building or physical structure. It represents the core history, culture, and civilization of our country. When someone suggested Munshiji that Somnath could be maintained as an ancient monument, he said that the temple lived in the sentiment of entire nation, and its reconstruction was a national pledge, national urge, a symbol of Hindu restoration. The temple's destruction, in Munshiji's view, was considered as a national disaster and has stayed deep in the consciousness of Hindus. Yeah, next please. To continue with the Munshiji's role in the reconstruction of Somnath temple, I would like to invite our co-author, Dr. Pinkuja.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thanks to our chair, Gupta ma'am, for allowing both of us to present our paper. I'll be taking just 5 to 6 minutes to sum up and to focus on remaining part of the paper. So when we are talking about, we already have discussed about K.M. Munshi's role in general, how he was somehow contributing to the restoration, or maybe we could say the reclaiming the identity through national consciousness of India by focusing on the Somnath rebuilding and reclaiming the identity through Somnath temple. So what exactly it was doing, so we can see in 4 different parts. So it was not just a historical reconstruction. We did actually focus, when we were talking about Munshi's work, we found that the archaeological engagement he was making with the help of B.K. Thapar, it was something very interesting to see, that it was not in terms of just something, as we already have been discussing, that it is not just a literary text or something, the literary source of history, rather than the archaeological engagements made it more fruitful. Similarly, the cultural articulation. So whenever we are talking about history, as my co-author already has said, the approach of K.M. Munshi was new historicism, where we are trying to understand history and literature together. So he was trying to see not just about historical reconstruction in terms of archaeological engagement, but also how to focus on the cultural articulation can be made possible. And yes, the very key aspect to the whole restoration project lies in this particular philosophical commitment to the dharma. So please, next slide, ma'am. And there is a particular letter we find which is written by Munshi, letter to Nehru, where he says that I cannot value freedom if it deprives us of the Bhagavad Gita or uproots our millions from the faith with which they look upon our temples and thereby destroy the texture of our lives. So this is what we are trying to see here, that the idea of the component of dharma, which was very much integral to the overall project. So it is not something from the level of surface we are trying to see, but rather than the very basic element of Indic knowledge, what we today discussed is, it was very much relevant, and it was very much, he was very vocal about it, and he was responding to the Nehru's like his disinterested attitude towards this whole project. So he was very much vocal about it, and he gives a reference of Gita and all how it is makes me almost sure that this shrine, once restored to a place of importance in our life, will give to our people a purer conception of religion, that religion is not what we see today in the Western conception. It has something different. It is based on code of conduct, not just something that we are saying that Islam and even Christianity, and they do have a different conception of religion. So that difference, that basic difference, he clearly makes a difference here in this letter to the response to the Nehru. Yes, ma'am, please, next slide. And yes, we can see that grounding the reconstruction that we already have mentioned about it, and yes, the collaboration with B.K. Thapar in terms of that excavation work at the Somnath site that enabled a systematic understanding of the temple's stratigraphy, architectural evolution, and material remains. So all those efforts have been done with the collaboration with B.K. Thapar. And yes, the study the nature of destruction of the temple site, establishing Somnath as a testament to civilizational endurance. So yeah, the major focus lies in this particular term, that is civilizational endurance. So we are not just talking about a regional temple or something which is located to the Gujarat or Saurashtra region, rather than as a whole Indic civilizational the identity, how it has to be revived. This has been somehow seen with this example of this project of Somnath. And yes, it somehow focused on the story of Somnath, which actually helped us to understand that it is not just talking about victimhood, rather than it is talking about resilience. So we are not just talking about what has been done to us, but how we survived and how we reclaimed our lost identity through it. So yes, it also focused on the, again, collaborative effort with other leaders that even we have been discussing since morning. So so just certain challenges we can see. The very first one was the secular Indian state. The term secular we have opted in our constitution, but what does it mean when we are talking religion state to be two different parts? But what religion actually means? So that has to be it was very difficult to understand at that time. The leadership of that particular period, it was not making any attempt to understand that very minor essence of the difference, maybe we can say. And yes, the Nehru's allegation of Hindu revivalism, his disinterested nature, and simultaneously we have seen the partition, the political ideological hegemony of, again, connected to the second point. And these are some of the, we can say, the problems, challenges we have faced. And the very major, or we can say the very central challenge we can say here, was the broader goal of Hindu civilizational revival. How we could have made it possible. So that was a very important, we can see, the problem we have been facing at that time. And even Munshi and other scholars of that period. Next slide, please. And now, in the end of our paper, we can see certain lessons for the contemporary temple movement. If today we are talking about this reclaiming through temples, and we are taking the example of Somnath, the successful example of Somnath. So what are the specific lessons we can take to today? So these are like temple reconstruction has to be understood with education, cultural revival, and intellectual inquiry. We are not just talking about temple, again, in sense of Western conception, which is just a place of pilgrimage or something worshipping to our gods, but also it has the multifaceted example. We use the term mandir. It is something which help us to transform our inner consciousness. It has wider connotation. So that has to be understood today. And resilience of community, zeal of devotee, collective endeavors, these has to be come together, which has been seen in the example of Somnath this initiative. So yeah, it has to be seen in a way like how political will and mass support come together to solve all those challenges that we have already discussed. And yes, no doubt the role of visionary leadership is very much important, and that vision cannot be just in sense of in the mind of leader, but the action has to be shown in some way. So these are a few lessons we can take for today's time. And the next, yeah, the last one is the references we have focused as if now. So this is what we have worked as if now, and maybe later on we'll have discussion on some inputs from your side. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Namaskar, respected chairperson and present dignitaries. I am myself Parika Rathod. I am a junior research fellow at Department of History, Sardar Patel University, Anand, Gujarat. And my paper's title is Somnath Revival and Sardar Patel. Next. So my paper has three main parts plus introduction and conclusion. For introduction, I would like to describe what my objectives are, which are to examine the reconstruction of Somnath temple in post-independent India by situating it within the broader framework of nation building and state integration under Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. A key objective of this study is to analyze Sardar's role in the integration of princely state, which is Junagadh, particularly because Somnath was a part of Junagadh state when India gained independence, and to show how this political achievement directly enabled the revival of Somnath. My three major focus points are the history, previous, which are the history of Somnath, in which I have described the construction, destruction, and reconstructions of Somnath temple over and over again. Second one is Sardar Patel and Junagadh and its integration with Indian state. And third one is Somnath and Sardar, in which during and after the integration of Junagadh with India, Sardar's visit to Junagadh and Somnath, and last is conclusion. Next. This is picture one is the remains of Somnath temple in I think about 1948, and the second one is of Somnath Museum. This temple before after the this man after उसको उतार लेने के बाद ये जो यहाँ पे म्यूजियम है वहाँ पे सारे पिलर्स इवन वहाँ से जो भी ऑर्नामेंट्स मिले हैं वो सब सोमनाथ म्यूजियम में अभी रखे हुए हैं. So I started the history of Somnath with its maybe the first known construction or restoration of existing smaller pillar by Moolraj Solanki in 997. Then the first foreign invasion was done by Mahmud of Ghazni in 1026. Then Bhimdev restored the temple. Meenal Devi, mother of Siddharth Jaisi, he was one of the ruler in Gujarat, made a significant donation here. Even Kumar Pal rebuilt this temple. Vastupal and Tejpal made a pilgrimage here and constructed a palace. I have written 1300 when Alauddin Khalji launched the second invasion. Two people before me have written 1299, so I don't know which one is correct. I will go back to it. Then after the collapse of Khalji dynasty, Ra Naugand alongside Vinjal Dev of Gujarat reinstated the Somnath Linga here. Then Rah Mahipal oversaw the renovations of the temple. Third invasion was done by Mahmud Tughlaq, the Sultan of Tughlaq dynasty. After him, the descendants of Vinjal Dev, Meghraj and Jaisi undertook the repairs of Somnath temple. In 1369, Zafar Khan invaded the Somnath temple and once again plundered the temple. Meghraj's younger brother, called Bham, ascended to power and he had the fort restored here. In 1395, Muzaffar, the Suba of Gujarat, attacked Somnath and destroyed the temple. Brahmadas Vijay Rai from the Vaja clan ascended to power and attempted to restore the temple. In 1414, Ahmad Shah seized the throne of Gujarat and assaulted the remaining temple. In 1451, Rah Mandalik III renovated this temple again. In 1419, Mahmud Begda attacked here and demolished the temple. In 1511, after Muhammad Begda's death, the Brahmins at Somnath resumed their worship here. Even Portuguese also engaged in war here. So Portuguese General de Castro arrived in 1547 in Prabhas Port and launched attack and even demolished the mosques and temples here. Aurangzeb ordered to destroy temples in 1665 and one of the temple was Somnath. In 1783, Queen Ahalyabai Holkar of the Indore erected a new shrine of Somnath a little distance away from the original temple, which is still here. Peshwa government gave money to fix the original temple in 1800. That region was a part of Junagadh when India gained independence in 1947. Next. This is Sardar visiting Somnath. So after 1947 and when Junagadh had a Nawab who was a Hindu, Mohabbat Khan, and most of the population was Hindu, but the Nawab was Muslim, and his minister Shah Nawaz Bhutto supported Jinnah and declared that Junagadh will be joining Pakistan. So Sardar Patel sent VP Menon to Junagadh on September 19 to talk about the merger, but it was in vain. So leaders from Kathiawar and Junagadh who wished to join India gathered in Mumbai, and at this convention they created a provisional government of Free Junagadh named Arzi Hukumat. After the military actions by Indian Army under the supervision of Sardar Patel and Arzi Hukumat volunteers, Bhutto issued a proposal to Indian government to seize the control of Junagadh, and after that Junagadh joined India in around 1948. Next. So this is Somnath Mandir Garbhagruh inauguration and Somnath Mandir today, as we can see. So Somnath and Sardar traveled to Junagadh on 13 November 1947. He was accompanied by N.V. Gadgil. In Junagadh, Sardar addressed an audience at Bahauddin College and paid a visit to Somnath Temple. Menon have written about his visit, stating that he was deeply affected to see the temple, one symbol of India's grandeur, now in state of despair, neglected and sorrowful. Gadgil also have mentioned this, and he have written that Sardar announced from Ahalyabai Holkar Hall to the people that he and the people of India are going to rebuild the Somnath temple. Jam Sahib of Nawanagar was present there and pledged to donate 1 lakh rupees for this noble cause. Even Shamal Das Gandhi, the leader of Arzi Hukumat, announced contribution of 51,000 rupees. After Gandhi and Sardar agreed that government would not fund the temple's restoration, instead the community should raise the necessary funds to undertake the project. To facilitate this, a Somnath Trust was formed by the people, with Jam Sahib serving as the president. He laid the foundation stone of the temple on 8th May 1950. Sardar was to conduct the consecration ceremony of the temple, but he died before that. So the then President of India, Rajendra Prasad, on 11th May 1951, performed the consecration ceremony of the Somnath Jyotirlinga. K.M. Munshi also have written about instances of Sardar and Somnath. In his book, Munshi recounts an episode involving Sardar and Somnath on October 1947 when he was with Sardar at his Delhi residence and received a call from Neelam Buch. The call informed him that Bhutto had suggested the Indian government to take control of Junagadh. Upon hearing this, Sardar expressed his delight and remarked to Munshi, "It is Jai Somnath." Now, Munshi has written 2 books. One is India Pilgrimage to India, and one is the Somnath, the Shrine Eternal. In both books, he has written this, yes, it is Jai Somnath. In one book, he says that Sardar has said it is Jai Somnath and Munshi was delighted. In other book, he says that he himself said that it is Jai Somnath and Sardar was delighted. So these both are contradictory and I don't know which one is true. Ma'am ने भी सुबह बताया था, तो it was just my remark. Then Sardar Gadgil and Jam Sahib also visit the premises of the temple. Munshi notes that after the all the occasions of temple, Sardar took some water from the sea in his hands and said, "My ambition is fulfilled here." So that was all. This temple also embodies multiple identities, and thanks to Sardar Patel and his initiative that we still have this temple with us. And by initiating the temple's restoration immediately after gaining independence, Sardar conveyed that true independence was cannot be fulfilled without cultural dignity. Next. These are the references I have used, and previous pictures I haven't downloaded them from internet. It was shared with me by Somnath Temple Trust. I came here for my fieldwork, PhD fieldwork, so I went to visit the Somnath Museum and even Somnath Temple Trust, and they provided me with these photographs and some books. So that is all. Thank you.
Namaste and Hari Om. I, Dr. Soumya Nagar, co-authoring my research under Ankur Joshi ji from Vanasali Vidyapith, and I am here to present my research on the topic, which is Somnath, the eternal soul of India, from Adi Shankaracharya ji's philosophy to modern governance. ये जो research है, इसमें I am answering two major questions. One, which is कि जब ये चीज महमूद ऑफ गजनी ने ये 1026 CE में किया, विध्वंस मचाया, उसके बाद ऐसी कौन सी चीज थी कि हम लोगों में, भारतीयों में ये तितिक्षा थी कि हमने 900 साल इसका इंतजार किया कि वापस से ये मंदिर बनेगा. और दूसरा प्रश्न मैंने जो इसमें वो करा है, हाईलाइट करा है, विच इज कि जब ये विध्वंस हो चुका और ये सारी चीजें मतलब कैसी ये आइडियोलॉजीज को हमने फॉलो करा कि हमने इन सबको प्रिजर्व करके चला. द सेकेंड वन इज कि अब आने वाले हजारों साल के लिए हम ऐसा मंदिरों में क्या कर दें, या क्या, जैसे अभी मेरे से जस्ट पहले आनंद सर ने एक यही चीज कोट करी है कि हम ऐसा क्या करें मंदिरों के लिए कि वो प्रिजर्व रहें और ऐसा कुछ ना हो या कोई इलीगल स्टेप ना उठाया जाए. So for this, the very starting is, I would like to start with a view that Somnath Mandir is not merely a primary story of physical destruction, followed by the glorious reconstruction led by Munshi ji and Sardar Patel ji in 1951. But Somnath is much more than that. It begs a profound question that how is it possible to carry forward this legacy, to have this patience to get it reconstructed after 900 long years? So the answer is because an invader can break the stones but cannot break the civilizational consciousness that we had for our mandir. That resilience was built in us by scriptures and the teachings we have got from the visionary leaders and the scholars and the acharyas we had. One of the major acharyas was Adi Shankaracharya ji. Next, please. I would like to quote a shlok for the same, which is Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lok Shankaram. Shankaracharya ji not only bring the physical structure together, but he also had this intellectual lineage of Guru Parampara first of all, and then it was the Alayam, the abode of knowledge that he had. The physical temple, the structure became the secondary thing because of the knowledge that we had to keep our mandir preserved for the same. Then when Ghazni attacked the physical walls, it was not the Somnath which has to be safeguarded by the broken lineage. It was completely untouched in the heart of people, allowing the leaders like Sardar Patel ji to manifest what was already within us. Next slide, please. As discussed, historians, these are some of the research papers which I have quoted, dated back from 1026 CE to 1951. There have been destruction, there have been reconstruction, but we can see the spiritual soul of the mandir, which was unconquered. And it has also been quoted by Jawaharlal Nehru, which has been wrongly said that it was Hindu revivalism. So basically, the mandir is not just, it was not just a Hindu revivalism, to which a counter argument which was given by K.M. Munshi, that the mandir is not just a building, it is a living entity. And the rebuilding it is necessary. So which is why this thought of reviving or reconstructing the Somnath came from. The next slide. Now the question arises: how did we, the masses, protected from protected or processed from this trauma? Shankaracharya ji, I would like to quote his vision regarding, which is Satya, Brahma Satya Jagan Mithya. He clearly separated Mithya, the temporary changing physical structure, from the Satyam, which is the eternal soul of the Jyotirling which was present. When invaders broke the ideal, the Hindu Mandir understood that only Mithya was damaged. The Satyam was indestructible. This psychology is what fueled our resilience. Next, the fifth. So the basic methodology which I have, the back one. The methodology which I have used in this paper is a sequential methodology in which I have taken into consideration the studies which were done by Adi Shankaracharya, his shlokas, his scriptures, and the post-independent governance, in which I have taken into consideration, I have done a research on mandir governance, taking into consideration 104 mandir of Rajasthan state, in which there were cities like Jaipur, Udaipur, Pushkar, there was Jodhpur, and there was Kota. So I have done research on the same, taking out the governance model out of it. I mean, what is the basic model or the framework every mandir is following, and what is that we are lacking behind, which is why we are not able to, cope up. There are certain instances I'll be quoting further. So the objective of my study is to evaluate the resilience which was created by Adi Shankaracharya ji through his Advaitvad or Advaita philosophy. Then it is to investigate the decolonization. How was it possible that after after the post-independence, we were still stuck on the same cultural identity that we had. Then it is the governance model that I have taken from this governance model I have taken the inspiration from the Ban Stham. As we see that the path of the Ban Stham is inobstructible. Likewise, we should also take inspiration from this, having a governance system which is not disturbed or is not obstructed by the state interference or the government interference. Because going into the 104 mandir, I have analyzed either it is the Devsthan Vibhag or it is the government, the state government interference, which is creating this chaos in management of the mandir. So this is the third one, the fourth point that I have taken into consideration. Next. So this is the sequential analysis in which there is a the first one is the philosophical stage taken from the Advaitvad. Then the second one is a civilisational mapping. How did the teachings carried forward in reconstruction of the mandir through Advaitvad, which is the concept of Mithya and Satyam. And then the third one is the governance stage. What kind of steps do we have to take that things like this does not happen in many thousand years again. Next. For this, next one, please. This is the basic structure from Kumarpala. As we can see, there were construction from Kumarpala to Ahilyabai Holkar, preserving the worship to 1951. and then reconstruction. It wasn't just the construction, but applied Advaita in the philosophy of us, which is the concept of unity and manifesting it in a real world. The next, please. So this is the timeline that I have showed how the construction and deconstruction happened and how the applied Advaita was applied in every step that we have taken into. Next. As I told you, I have taken inspiration from the Banstam. Here, it is the example that Banstam, the arrow pillar, the inscription state the unobstructed landmass from this point to the South Pole. Scientifically brilliant, yes, but metaphorically it is a direction from governance, stating unobstructable path from sacred institution with less political interference and bureaucratical roadblocks. We currently face a governance crisis despite of having a multi-billion-dollar economy. Revenue meant from dan, charity, palan, protection is often derived by government appointed bureaucrats, due to which the spiritual ecosystem is being compromised. For this, as we can see, there are certain issues we have seen. There is no lack of funds in the mandir system, in the mandir arthvyavastha. There is no lack of funds that we can not allocate in, but there is what we can lack what we are lacking behind is in the management of the Devsthan Vibhag. Say for example, I'll be quoting here, I went for a data collection, as I told you. So I have collected data from the pujaris. Also, I have collected data from the priests, the local community members, from the devotees that come visit the mandir daily. The major problem that I have felt is, first of all, the revenue given to the Devsthan, the revenue given by the Devsthan Vibhag to the pujaris is very less. To suffice family of 4, it cannot be possible. It is basically from 21,000 to 28,000, varied in various mandirs. And now there is a concept that pujari, we consider themselves pujaris as the one who is taking the bribe, or we consider them as not having a sattvic motive and rather having a commercialized motive. So this is what the problem is, because we have given everything in the hands of Devsthan Vibhag, the governance is lacking behind. Next slide, please. For this, I have derived a model which is the Dharm Sanchalan integrated governance model, in which I have taken 4 things into consideration. Next one. In which I have taken these things into consideration. The first one is leadership. As we notice that पहले नाथ संप्रदाय या फिर जो पुश्तैनी जिनके मंदिर चलते आ रहे थे, अभी उन लोगों से भी they have taken the authorities, they have taken the rights, and it has come under Devsthan Vibhag. तो जो एक भक्ति भाव वाला जो भाव प्रिंसिपल था, which has been shifted to more of a commercialized principle now. तो वो भाव प्रिंसिपल ना छिन जाए, इसके लिए लीडरशिप आई फील गवर्नेंस कंट्रोल से वापस से आपको उस परंपरागत मंदिर को या उनको वापस से दी जानी चाहिए. द नेक्स्ट थिंग इज फाइनेंशियल ट्रांसपेरेंसी. फॉर दिस देयर इज अ डबल लॉक सिस्टम व्हिच आई हैव इंट्रोड्यूस्ड. आई हैव रिटन एक्चुअली अ बुक ऑन देवालय से धर्म संचालन. द बुक नेम इज, in which I have quoted this. There must be a double lock system in which one lock should be kept with the Devsthan Vibhag and the other lock should be kept with the Pujari. इससे ट्रांसपेरेंसी रहेगी. ई डोनेशंस के थ्रू या विजिबिलिटी हम ट्रांसपेरेंसी रखे डोनेशंस में, क्योंकि अभी हो क्या रहा है मंदिर में जितने डोनेशंस, देयर इज नो लैक ऑफ डोनेशन इन एनी मंदिर. आई फील it is the bhav that they have been not applying it on the right place. Then the next one is the accountability. As I have mentioned, the Bhakt Sabha. कम्युनिटीज को भी उतना ही, वहाँ की लोकल कम्युनिटीज जिनमें वो भाव है मंदिर के प्रति, उनको भी उतना ही चांस मिलना चाहिए उस मंदिर में, उतना ही राइट होना चाहिए किसी डिसीजन मेकिंग को लेके. अगर ये कम्युनिटी बेस्ड सिस्टम बन जाएगा रादर देन हैविंग ऑल द कंट्रोल ओवर द स्टेट और द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, आई फील इट विल वर्क मच appropriately. For this, I'll quote an example. There is a खोले के हनुमान जी मंदिर in Jaipur, Rajasthan. लिम्का बुक ऑफ वर्ल्ड रिकॉर्ड्स में इसका नाम आया है. है सिर्फ इसीलिए क्योंकि वो कम्युनिटी बेस्ड उनकी जो गवर्नेंस रही है उसकी वजह से. What they have done is they have formed a group of 154 members in that particular area. जो उस community के लोग हैं उन्होंने 154 लोगों का एक chain, एक membership बनाई है जिसके अंदर they donate, they have this यज्ञशाला also. वहाँ कर्मकांड भी सिखाया जाता है, वहाँ पे योग भी सिखाया जाता है, मतलब वो voluntarily वो services दे रहे हैं. लिम्का बुक ऑफ वर्ल्ड रिकॉर्ड्स में आया क्योंकि जो चैरिटी वो दे रहे हैं उससे वो डेली आई गेस 1,20,000 लोगों को अन्नदान कर रहे हैं directly or indirectly. So this is a great example of community based ownership if we do. And the next one is spiritual anatomy. अगम शास्त्र से स्ट्रिक्टली अगर हम डिराइव करें टीचिंग्स और उसी तरह से मंदिर का वापस से पालन पोषण करें तो मेरे ख्याल से ये ज्यादा ट्रांसपेरेंट एक फॉलो अप होगा. The next slide. Then it can be done on the 3 levels. First one is having a curriculum जहाँ जैसे अब सोमनाथ का डिस्ट्रक्शन हमें क्यों एक सिंपोजियम के थ्रू समझाना पड़ रहा है क्योंकि हमारे करिकुलम में नहीं था. तो जब करिकुलम में हम ऐसी चीजें इम्पोज कर देंगे बच्चों को पढ़ाई जाएंगी तो पहली चीज जो इम्पैक्ट होगा कि एनईपी में हम ऐसी चीज जो इम्प्लीमेंट तो की गई है लेकिन वो किसी तरह से करिकुलम में भी फ्रेम हो, बच्चों को पढ़ाई भी जाए. द सेकंड थिंग इज द रीजनल वन स्कूल्स इस तरीके के खोले जाएं या गुरुकुल व्यवस्था इस तरह से बढ़ा दी जाए. ऑल्दो देयर आर गुरुकुल सिस्टम बट इट शुड बी मोर इफेक्टिवली वर्किंग और मोर प्रोपोगेटेड. और मंदिर है वहाँ पे टीचिंग्स दी जाए या वहाँ पे गुरुकुलम खोले जाए, इस तरीके की चीज़ है. एंड द थर्ड वन इज द लोकल वन, एज आई हैव सेड कम्युनिटी बेस्ड गाइडेंस होनी चाहिए या कम्युनिटी बेस्ड गवर्नेंस होनी चाहिए इसमें. नेक्स्ट. The conclusion of my study, I have derived it in 2 conclusions. The first one is reconstruction of Somnath was not possible because trust of people was sustained through विद्वान लाइक मतलब ये पॉसिबल ही नहीं हो पाता, ये वापस रिकंस्ट्रक्ट ही नहीं हो पाता अगर विद्वान आदि शंकराचार्य जैसे एक फिलॉसफी वो अद्वैतवाद की या फिर वो ब्रह्म सत्य जगन मिथ्या जैसे जो कॉन्सेप्ट्स हमारे समाज में आए हैं अगर वो नहीं होते तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि भगवान पे हम पे उतना वो विश्वास रह पाता. The second thing is our duty is to build a robust ethical governance structure like Dharm Sanchalan model which I have mentioned earlier to protect the unconquered soul of these mandirs for next 1,000 years. Thank you.
So with this last presentation, we end the presentations in this session. I would like to open up for the questions and then would reserve my remarks for the end. Okay, looks a siesta time, post-lunch session. Doesn't matter. See, in Bharatiya tradition, we have a sanskar called Garbha Sanskar. And the temples have Garbhagriha. Is there anything which is common out of these? Because all Garbha, they are bound out of a seed. And when a child is born to a mother, we do everything anew. And when the second child is born, it's not the continuation of the first one. It's again a new birth. It's again a new sanskar. It's again a new existence. So whenever something of this entity which is spiritually purifying to the soul, like temples, they are destroyed and they are constructed, though there is a continuation of Garbha, but sanskar is always new. So it is called new construction. And when you construct it new, then of course the societal realities might have changed, the political realities might have changed, the circumstances might have changed, the financial positions might have changed. And in these changed realities, we are still continuing with our age-old belief. And that beauty and that truth, what better can be explained than by Somnath? Because when we reach out to Somnath, we are not constructing temples. Temple is the manifestation of our that urge to have its existence again and again. As far as the question came of temples doing their duties, whether it is in the form of pujaris or in the form of an entity or in the form of governments or in the form of NGOs and all, I think each temple is performing their duties. It all depends upon the expectations of the society, how far they need more. I know at least these two temples, Somnath and Dwarika, they cater to the surrounding villages. Whatever is gathered there, because I am a donor at Dwarika and I know there is one commodity which is not produced here in Gujarat, and that is sugar. Sugar is always, bought from the other states. So in Dwarika, there is a tradition of donating sugar. And with that sugar, 127 villages of the surrounding temple, they are given this sugar. So temples are performing their duties. It's a collective, even Somnath, I would correct a small thing that Adani Narendra Modi ji is not a member because he is a prime minister. He was already a member and he continues to be a member. So our fear that the next PM will also be a member is not true. It's not by the post. What we say is that is it the othering that is bothering us? Are we giving away this responsibility of protecting the duties of temples to others? Or are we becoming a part of that machine? I'm reminded of two sher. One is by Sahir Ludhianvi. So he says, हर एक दौर का मजहब नया खुदा लाया, करें तो हम भी मगर किस खुदा की बात करें. So there is a dilemma. There is a dilemma where we have disconnected ourselves and that each system is under a scanner. We are not satisfied with anything. Whatever is happening, we are super critique over it. But how far our roles are important to get mingled into it and corrected. And then the second is मेरी पहचान दरख्तों के बदन पर रखना, मैं बिखर जाऊं तो खुशबू का मुकद्दर लिखना. That is Somnath. How many times it has been ransacked, looted, taken away the wealth. But the truth is, each time the first brick falls, the process of construction starts from there. If not physically, then in minds. So, Somnath is a very, very big symbol, bigger than what we can think about, bigger than the words can explain. And I compliment all the presenters. You have tried your best for your age, what you have understood. I'm sure this spirit will only not let Somnath down again ever. Thank you, organizers, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the chair and the speakers. We will now break for tea for 15 minutes.
अच्छी बात है, चला हम लोग जाते हैं।
Now comes the professional work. Oh, देखो ये ग्रुप का क्या होता है? बचना भी उठ गया। जी जी। Yes.
वहाँ पीछे क्यों बैठे हैं? आगे आ जाओ।
Welcome back, everyone. We will now move to the final session titled The Falsehood of Left Historiography, chaired by Dr. Vikram Sampath. I invite the chair and speakers Shreya Shinde and Pushkar Raj to the stage. Thank you.
Namaste, I'm Shreya Shinde, and my topic for the research paper is reconstructing the left authorship on Somnath. Now, it is significant to read about the geographical, civilisational, or archaeological aspect of the destruction caused by Mahmud of Ghazni on Somnath temple. But subsequently, what gets more important is the interpretation of the destruction that happened. And that interpretation is based on a methodology, a critical way of thinking. It's a theoretical framework, and that is what we call leftist historiography or Marxist historiography, a Marxist way of looking at Indian history. So, to begin with, change the slide. Change the slide. Yes. So, because my paper is theoretically a bit heavy, because it discusses about Marxist way of looking at history, first let me clear what am I going to speak themes by themes. The first is the origin of leftist historiography. We cannot possibly talk about what historians or what leftist historians have talked about or written about the Mahmud of Ghazni's destruction on Somnath temple without discussing the brain behind it. We need to talk about what is Marxist history when it comes to Indian history. So that is the origin of the leftist historiography. The second thing, we will talk about the practical application of the Marxist historiography on certain sub-themes. The third and the conclusion part is the alternative that we propose for the Marxist historiography. Change the slide. Change the slide, please. Okay, change the slide. So before delving into the leftist historiography or Marxist way of looking at history, we need to first understand what is historiography. It is basically writing of history. We see certain sources, we select the archaeological, numismatic, epigraphical sources, we critically analyze it, we make theories out of it, and or we make narratives out of it. And that is exactly what leftist historiography does seriously. So what do we mean when we talk about leftist historiography? The origin of leftist historiography firstly begins with the pioneer, the Indian Marxist scholar, D.D. Kosambi, with his definition of history. Now, this definition of history is a classical Marxist definition. It says, history is the development in chronological sequence of means and relationship of humans of production. So basically, it has two themes. Number one is base and superstructure. Number two is economic determinism and historical materialism. Change the slide. So when we talk about these two themes, base and superstructure and economic determinism and historical materialism, let's deconstruct it first. Base means economic base, material base, and the superstructure means the religious base, the cultural base. And economic determinism means every aspect of society, be it religion, has always been economic. And by historical materialism, it means every stage of history, every levels of history, or every levels of civilization has material. It is not on the basis of ideas. It is not on the basis of the scriptures. That's what D.D. Kosambi says. The history that we have today. D.D. Kosambi says that the history that we have today is based on scriptures. It is based on Brahmanical scriptures. It is not based on material. The idea is not important, but the material basis is important. Now, this is what entirely the Marxist historiography consists of. And they subsequently and consistently criticize the Indic way of looking at history. Our Indic way of looking at history are our scriptures, Vedas, Puranas, or Upanishad. Now, when we talk about, change the slide. So, when we talk about the leftist way or the leftist historiography that wrote the accounts of Muhammad of Ghazni and his destruction of the temple, firstly, the first important fundamental framework of Marxist theory that Romila Thapar, historians like Romila Thapar take, is Indian feudalism. Now, what is this entire, change the slide? Now, what is this entire framework of Indian feudalism? Is a classical Marxist way of looking at history. The Indian feudalism says our history is divided into chronology. And the advanced stage of history begins with Islamic encounters and invasions. And that's where we start documenting it. That's where we start finding accounts, Al-Biruni, the foreign travelers. So that's how the Marxist historiography says the primary stage of Indian history begins with the Islamic invasion. And they account it as Indian feudalism. So before Indian feudalism or before Islamic invasion, we don't have any history. What begins as history is the post-Islamic effect or during Islamic effect. So what happens in the Indian feudalism? And let's connect it with the Somnath temple and what Romila Thapar wrote about it. So the entire event of destruction of temple by Muhammad of Ghazni gets categorized or gets trivialized within the Indian feudalism framework. What happens here is that she normalizes the plunder and the raids that happen on the temple by saying that it was economical necessity on the side of Muhammad of Ghazni to do it. What was the economic necessity? Because there was a political change the slide. Because there was a political and strategic crisis in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, in Ghaznavid Empire. That's the reason it was very much imperative on the ends of Muhammad of Ghazni to begin plundering, to begin raids. So what happens in this process of Indian feudalism is that we trivialize the entire collective trauma faced by Hindus into the framework of Indian feudalism. We only look at the economic aspect. We don't look at the religious aspect. And secondly, Romila Thapar observed some of inscriptions, Sanskrit inscriptions, and one of them is by Nuruddin. Nuruddin Sanskrit and Urdu inscriptions on the Somnath, on the lands of Somnath, where he writes in Urdu that the trade aspect is much more stronger than the religious aspect. And this is exactly what Romila Thapar picks up and says, even the Hindus want the economic integration of their land with the Arab and the Turks. That's the reason the religious significance, the civilizational significance of this destruction gets negated by the left historians. The second thing, change the slide. The second thing is a framework called caste as a negation of history that is used by first D.D. Kosambi, and that gets very cunningly integrated into the interpretation of Somnath by Romila Thapar. Now, how does it happen? How is caste seen as a negation of history? D.D. Kosambi says that there are certain elements in our Indian society where caste negates it, the economic development, the material production. We don't see it as development at all. Because the caste is enveloped in the dharmic framework, we do not have real Indian material history. This is what D.D. Kosambi says in a Marxist framework. And how Romila Thapar uses it. Romila Thapar uses it as a double-edged sword. She says, and I quote, "Were there any possible Hindus during medieval Indian period? Who were the Hindus? Did we actually have that identity? Because when Ghazni's invasion happened, the subsequent resistance was by Rajputs, Chalukyas. They did not claim to be Hindus. So how can you say, how can K.M. Munshi says, she quotes, it is a collective trauma because you were yourself not a collective. So how can you say you are collective? Because you were divided into sections. And the system that is itself hierarchical, how can it say it is collective? And how can it say it has a collective trauma? So the memory of collective trauma that K.M. Munshi proudly says, Romila Thapar quotes, it is just a present memory. It is not a past construction. It is a present memory. So, and the second thing that the caste as a negation of history that Romila Thapar uses when it comes to Somnath invasion, she says, why aren't we finding any subaltern inscriptions or subaltern records of that memory when it comes to Hindus in terms of the destruction that happened in the temple? Why can't we have an account written by the subaltern voices, the minority voices? Did the Hindus of that time particularly see the Muslims as we see today? Or did they see themselves as Arab or Turk or Persian? So this is how she uses caste as a weapon to negate the collective trauma that Hindus faced during that event. Change the slide. So left historiography has a very interesting way of decentralizing the entire main issue. And I call it as enmeshment or a melting pot. What happens here is that authors have posed varied research questions and specifically research gaps, as you can see on the screen, through Marxist lens, that what gets manufactured out of Somnath temple invasions by Ghazni is a melting pot of vague possibilities, vague research gaps, rather than a historical conclusion. They keep on asking you 100 research gaps or 100 research probabilities rather than giving you one single account of collective trauma faced by Hindus. So the question goes, demystifying the temple destruction. So basically, you have to take away the entire Hindu trauma and just only talk about destruction. Secondly, questioning what constitutes this memory. How is this memory even made? Third, she says even the Hindu kings or Hindu dynasty, they also deconstructed the Hindu temples. So if they are doing it, why aren't we using the same lenses to observe the Mahmud of Ghazni invasion as well? Why are we using some different lens? The fourth, critically analyzing the Somnath temple invasions act through the lens of Central Asian crisis. Now, what is the Central Asian crisis she talks about? So basically, you take out the entire domestic perspective and put it on a world map. So thereby, you are reducing the entire trauma or the gravity of trauma Hindu face by asking, it was a Central Asian necessity in the Ghaznavid Empire to do so. But no one is talking about what happened to the Hindu framework of it. The last one, interpreting the event of destruction and its narratives from the viewpoint of all the social groups. So that's how they take away the agency of the trauma itself. We cannot talk about a main Hindu framework without talking about all the social group involved. This is what the classical Marxist historiography means. We have to include all to do justice to one. Change the slide. The interpretation and the use of Turk-Persian chronicles. Now, this is where it gets practical. Until now, we have discussed what was the brain behind Marxist historiography. It is economical, it is not religious. it is state based, it is geopolitical based, but here it gets practical by the left authors. So these are some of the bibliography that the left authorship uses, works of Al-Biruni, quote historians like Farooqi Sistani and Gardizi. Now what happens here are two themes, two frameworks that Romila Thapar exclusively uses. Number one, there are certain court historians like Al-Biruni who are court historians of Mahmud of Ghazni, and when they sit down and write about the accounts, and they themselves quote and say that the very act of destruction of temple is religious, she negates it. She doesn't see it. But what she sees, she ridicules the entire narrative of Al-Biruni, who is a court historian. She says, because there is a Central Asian crisis and because Mahmud of Ghazni has to become a sultan, Al-Biruni is basically not happy with it. He was removed out of Ghaznavid Empire. And such other court historians who write the narrative of religious zeal behind Somnath invasion, she ridicules it by calling, you want a political patronage. But by the same court historians such as Farooqi Sistani and Gardizi, when they write about economic reasons or Central Asian reasons, she picks it up. But when the same historians do it, when it comes to religious zeal, she ignores it. And the most interesting part of that argument, which is given by court historian, similarly Farooqi Sistani and Gardizi, they write about one specific story of Mannat. Now, Mannat is a pre-Islamic goddess. So there were three goddesses in pre-Islamic period in these Arabia. One of them was Mannat. Two of them were broken due to the order of Allah. And the Mannat is supposedly in the lands of Kathiawar or Somnath. And when this happens to be known by Mahmud of Ghazni, he has two zeals now. Both of them based on religious reason. One is to kill or is to destruct the Mannat goddess, so as to proclaim that you are following the order of Allah. And secondly, to also destruct the lingam. So thereby you are fulfilling two of the purposes. The question that I have when it comes to this interpretation of left authorship is that if we are dismantling the entire religious narrative of every court historian when it comes to Hindu iconoclasm, why are we taking the question of Mannat? That's a single question that we are having, but we are still picking it up. But we are negating every single aspect of iconoclasm. We are not considering Al-Biruni, who himself writes that it's an holy war. But we are taking Mannat as a classical example, exclusive example. So the entire Marxist historiography is basically based upon benefit of doubt. We can have possibly hundreds of research potential, but not one single conclusion, because we have to confuse the readers. Last slide. This is one of the possible conclusion. It's not a specific solution or one and all. The authorship that we have in front of us is a left authorship which is organized, which is systematic, which has a methodological framework. It has a systematic way of thinking. And what we are today, Hindu intelligentsia, as well as the authors, the Hindu authors, we are thinking individually. We are writing individually. We do not have our own framework. We do not have our own methodology, because what is in front of us is an entire system which doesn't allow us entry, and which has been mathematically designed in terms of theoretical frameworks. We cannot really defeat them if we do not have our own indie framework. We do not only want indie authors, but we want indie framework. It is just one of the possible solution. We are not disowning our own way of thinking, but we can have our own framework so as we can counter them. It's not about defeating them, it's about countering them systematically, framework by framework. So yeah, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Pushkar, student of Persian Language and Literature at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So the topic of my paper is Representation of the Ghaznavid Rate at Somnath in Muslim Sources, a critique of contemporary scholarship. So like many speakers who came before me have already told so many things, so I will try to tell you only the new things which have not been discussed here. So in this paper, I undertake a systematic historiographical critique of such interpretation, Muslim interpretation basically, by tracing the representation of the Somnath raid across a chronological range of Muslim sources from near contemporary accounts such as those of Farooqi and Gardizi to later Mughal era commentaries such as Badauni or Nizamuddin M. Please show the first slide. So I'll sum up it like very briefly because Al-Baruni have been discussed by most of us here. So the Al-Baruni, the account of Al-Baruni is very sober historically. He mentioned no holy war, he mentioned no religious zeal in the raid of Mahmud, and historians like Thapar and Eaton have tried to justify it because Baruni was the most near contemporary source when it comes to the Mahmud raid at Somnath. But if we look at the book, the Tehqiq-e-Hind written by Baruni, the primary goal of the book was not to document the raids of Mahmud. The primary goal was the research in the Indian religion and Indian belief. So he gave very passing remarks at the raid of Somnath. He just mentioned that Mahmud came, broke the idol, threw it into the hippodrome at Ghazni, and he left. But in his paper, he rightly like traces the Somnath was one of the most important shrine across the country because he mentioned that right across the Multan, every houses have small Shivlingam, but no Shivlingam is as popular as Somnath, where flowers are coming from Kashmir. Ganga Jal is drawn daily to the temple. So we know that one of the things which drew Mahmud to Somnath was its popularity, not the economic prosperity. Coming to the next sources like Farooqi, like Shreya highlighted the story of Somnath. So I want to switch in Hindi and tell you the story of what was the Arabian goddess of Manat. So हाँ, तो कहानी आती है कि फरूकी के सोर्स में आता है कि एक दिन महमूद अपने दरबार में बैठे थे और कोई उनके पास खबर लाता है कि जब प्रॉफिट का प्रादुर्भाव हुआ अरेबिया में तो काबा में बहुत सारे आइडल थे, तो प्रॉफिट ने अली को आदेश दिया कि सारे आइडल को आप तोड़ो। उसमें एक आइडल था गॉडेस का जिसका नाम मनात था। तो अली ने सारे आइडल तोड़े, लेकिन जब बाकी जो बुत परस्त थे उन्होंने एक मूर्ति छुपा के कैसे भी सोमनाथ भेज दी। और फरूकी इंटरेस्टिंगली बोलता है कि सोमनाथ का नाम इसीलिए सोमनाथ है, इन्होंने मनात नाम छुपा के इसका सोमनाथ नाम रख दिया है कि किसी को पता नहीं चले। तो महमूद जब ये कहानी सुनता है तो महमूद बहुत चार्ज अप हो जाता है कि अब तो मैं मतलब अली का जो लेफ्ट ओवर काम है मैं पूरा करूंगा। और इंटरेस्टिंगली ये है कि अली जो कि एक रिवर्ट फिगर थे इस्माइलीज के लिए, शिया के लिए, जिनको महमूद हेरेटिक मानता था, और महमूद ने बड़े रेड्स में मुल्तान में और ईरान के रे में उनका प्रोसिक्यूशन किया, पर यहाँ इंटरेस्टिंगली वो अली के लेफ्ट ओवर काम को करने के लिए सोमनाथ आता है। तो मनात का जो फेबल है वो अल बरूनी के टेक्स्ट में नहीं मिलता, वो हमें सबसे पहली बार फरूकी में मिलता है। और इसका एक इंटरेस्टिंग रीजन मेरे हिसाब से ये है कि मुस्लिम राइटर्स बहुत कंफ्यूज थे हिंदू थियोलॉजी के हायरार्की को समझने में। वो सोमनाथ का इंपॉर्टेंस बढ़ाना चाहते थे इसलिए कि उससे डिसिक्रेशन और ग्लोरीफाई हो, बट दे वर नॉट एबल टू लोकेट कि विच आइडल इज द हाईएस्ट, विच टेम्पल इज like supreme, like they were not able to draw the equivalent, so they tried to like invent the story of Manat, and they tried to tell that Somnath was Kaaba of Hindus. That's why Mahmud came here. There's also an Arabic source named Zakaria al-Qazwini. Isme Athar al-Balad clearly says that he made great efforts to capture and destroy Somnath in the hope that Hindus would then become Muhammadans. So the intent of Mahmud was very clear that if you like destroy the most important shrine of the Hindus, they will feel that the idol is powerless, the Shivlingam is not helping them, and they would accept Islam. Moving back from Gardizi and Farooqi, we'll come to one of the very interesting source, because I'm a student of Persian language and most of you have like थोड़ा बहुत भी अगर आप पर्शियन के बारे में जानते होंगे तो आपने सादी शिराजी का नाम सुना होगा। Sadi Shirazi was very secular writer. He wrote Bustan. He had no relation with Mahmud and all. He was in Iran. But in his Bustan, there's a chapter called Somnathiya. And all of a sudden, he mentioned that I traveled to Somnath once. In 13th century, he is writing. And we all know that he never traveled. It was like a poetic imagination or some Sufi dream. But interestingly tells, and I will narrate you the story in simple terms, कि सादी का एक ब्राह्मण दोस्त बनता है जो उसको सोमनाथ घुमाने लेके आता है। और वहां जब सादी आता है, मंदिर में देखता है, मूर्ति को देखता है, तो सादी अपने ब्राह्मण दोस्त को बोलता है कि यार तुम्हें सच में लगता है कि इसमें कुछ पावर है? पत्थर की मूर्तियों में तुम इतना दिल लगा रहे हो, उसमें कोई शक्ति तो है नहीं। इस पे ब्राह्मण सादी से क्रोधित हो जाता है और बातचीत करनी बंद कर देता है। तो सादी एक्टिंग के लिए उसको बोलता है कि मैं तो बहुत क्यूरियस हूँ, तुम मुझे आइडल में बिलीव तो करवाओ, तब मैं कन्वर्ट हो जाऊंगा तुम्हारे रिलीजन में। फिर तो पंडित उसे बोलता है कि आप रात भर विश्राम करो सोमनाथ में, मैं आपको सुबह इस मूर्ति की शक्ति दिखाऊंगा। अब सुबह अचानक से ध्वनि होती है और सादी उठता है तो देखता है कि मूर्ति हल्का सा हाथ हिला रही है। सादी की जो मूर्ति थी शिवलिंगम नहीं थी शायद, उसका हाथ था। तो सादी समझ जाता है कि कोई चीटिंग है या कोई मैकेनिक्स है, लेकिन अब वो कुछ कर नहीं सकता था, तो कहता है कि ठीक है मैं कन्वर्ट हो जाऊंगा। तो ब्राह्मण बोलता है कि आप मूर्ति को आके अपना रिस्पेक्ट ऑफर करिए। तो वो करता भी है और वो मन से, लेकिन वहां पे एक वर्स पर्शियन में बोलता है कि जो मूर्ति है उस पर भी लानत है, जो इसकी पूजा करते हैं उस पर भी है। फिर वो क्या करता है कि मंदिर में खोजता है और रात में वो देखता है कि एक ब्राह्मण मूर्ति के ऊपर खड़ा है जो छुपके से हाथ हिला देता है रस्सी से मूर्ति का, और फिर सादी उसको जान से मार देता है और ईरान भाग जाता है। इंटरेस्टिंगली अब इस स्टोरी में देखो तो महमूद का कोई मेंशन नहीं है, और सादी क्रेडिट लेना चाहता था कि एक्चुअली जो सोमनाथ के आइडल की जो इग्नोरेंस थी वो मैंने सबको बताई। तो 13वीं सेंचुरी तक व्हाट वी सी कि सिर्फ इंडियन सोर्सेस या महमूद के कोर्ट सोर्सेस में नहीं, अक्रॉस द वाइडर इस्लामिक वर्ल्ड सोमनाथ एक ऐसी कहानी बन गई थी जिसको दिखा के आप दिखा सकते थे कि इस्लाम कितना इनलाइटेंड रिलीजन है और जो एग्जिस्टिंग पेगन बिलीव्स है वो कितनी मतलब इलॉजिकल है, और जो आइडल वर्शिपिंग कितनी ज्यादा फ्यूटाइल है। क्योंकि कुछ सोर्स जो आपको स्लाइड आ गई, शादी के बाद कुछ सोर्स आते हैं वो तो शादी को ही डायरेक्ट एट्रीब्यूट करते हैं कि सोमनाथ का मंदिर शादी ने तोड़ा था। अब हमें पता है कि ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि महमूद के बारे में वो अवेयर नहीं थे, क्योंकि महमूद की कहानी बहुत पॉपुलर थी, लेकिन बहुत सारे जो लोग थे वो सूफीज भी बहुत सारे थे, वो क्रेडिट लेना चाहते थे कि वी डिस्ट्रॉयड द सोमनाथ। मूविंग फॉरवर्ड, जब दिल्ली सल्तनत का एस्टेब्लिशमेंट होता है तो बहुत सारी टेक्स्ट उस समय लिखी गई है, जिसमें सबसे पहली टेक्स्ट विच आई डील इसमें वो है तबाकत नासरी। तबाकत नासरी में कहानी आती है कि जब महमूद पैदा ही हो रहा था तो उसके पिताजी को एक सपना आता है सुबुक्तिगीन को कि मेरे आंगन में आज एक बड़ा सा पेड़ निकला और उसने पूरे संसार को अपने छाव से ढक दिया। तो बुलाते हैं और जिस टाइम जन्म होता है महमूद का उसी टाइम जो वाई हिंद है आज का पेशावर, वहां एक मंदिर होता है टूट जाता है, जिससे सबको पता चल जाता है कि महमूद अब आया है, मतलब आइडल हर जगह टूटेंगे। तो हम एक देखते हैं कि महमूद एक मिलिट्री रेड से पहले जो थोड़ा ग्लोरीफाई था, अब एक इस्लाम में मिथिकल फिगर बन जाता है, जो पूरे इस्लामी क्लासिकल वर्ल्ड में जो बहुत सारी पर्शियन बुक्स है जो बच्चों के लिए कहानी होती थी उसमें महमूद की कहानी आइडल रूलर की तरह, और सोमनाथ का बुत तोड़ना सबसे ग्लोरीफाइंग एक्ट बन जाता है। इसमें सबसे इंटरेस्टिंग सोर्स है जो अभी तक किसी ने जो यहाँ डील नहीं किया, वो है फुतूह सलातीन इसामी का। फुतूह सलातीन इसमें एकदम ही एक नई कहानी इन्वेंट करता है, जिसमें कि जब महमूद बच्चा ही होता है तो सोमनाथ के और भारत के ब्राह्मणों को पता चल जाता है, जो नजूमी है एस्ट्रोलॉजर, कि भविष्य में एक राजा आएगा महमूद जो सोमनाथ तोड़ देगा। तो ये लोग पहले ही जाते हैं गजनी। महमूद बच्चा होता है, खेल रहा होता है, और ब्राह्मण उससे रिक्वेस्ट करते हैं कि महाराज जब आप आइए सोमनाथ तोड़िए तो आप सब कुछ ले जाइएगा, मूर्ति छोड़ दीजिएगा। तो महमूद मान जाता है, और फास्ट फॉरवर्ड तो कहानी आती है, महमूद आता है मूर्ति तोड़ता है, तो ब्राह्मण फिर जाते हैं कि महाराज आपको तो अपना वचन याद होगा, आपने हमें बोला था कि आप मूर्ति लौटा देंगे। अब महमूद दुविधा में पड़ जाता है कि यार मैं वचन नहीं तोड़ सकता और मूर्ति भी लौटाना नहीं चाहता। तो महमूद उनको बोलता है कि आप कल आओ, कल मैं मूर्ति लौटा दूंगा। और महमूद उस टाइम क्या करता है, बोलता है कि जो शिवलिंग है इसको क्रश करो, मेक इट टू लाइमस्टोन चूना, और इसको पान के पत्ते पे लगा दो, और कल जब वो ब्राह्मण आते हैं तो वही पान उनको खिला देता है। और जब ब्राह्मण पान खा लेते हैं तो फिर महमूद से पूछते हैं कि हमारा आइडल, तो उनको कहता है कि आइडल आपका पेट में है, और तो वो ब्राह्मण जाते हैं और अपने पेट को काट के मर जाते हैं। तो इतनी स्टूपिड स्टोरी में आप देखेंगे कि एक जो ब्राह्मण्स को शैरलेटन की तरह प्रोजेक्ट करने का और विलिफाई करने का इतना स्ट्रॉन्ग अर्ज था दिल्ली सल्तनत के सोर्सेस में। इसमें स्कॉलर्स लाइक थापर और ईटन आर्ग्यू करते हैं कि दिल्ली सल्तनत बहुत ज्यादा क्या कहते हैं, उनकी जो पॉलिटिकल लेजिटिमेसी स्टैब्लिश नहीं हुई थी तो महमूद को हीरो बना रहे थे, बट अगर हम देखें तो उनका कोई डायरेक्ट कनेक्शन था नहीं। बट क्योंकि इसामी जो ये कहानी लिख रहा है वो खुद बहमनी सल्तनत के कोर्ट में रहता है, विच इज कंपैरेटिवली नियर टू गुजरात, सो उस समय भी ही वाज वेल अवेयर अबाउट द प्रोमिनेंस ऑफ सोमनाथ, और इसलिए ही वाज इन्वेंटिंग स्टोरीज लाइक सच। और वो एक स्टेप आगे जाके ये भी कहता है कि महमूद का बर्थ ही इसलिए हुआ था कि सोमनाथ को आके तोड़ेगा, दैट वाज लाइक सोल मोटिव ऑफ हिज होल लाइफ। Moving forward from the Delhi Sultanate source, when we come to the Mughal sources, we see कि Mughal sources में religious tone कम हो जाता है, क्योंकि obviously there was like effect of Akbar's liberal environment on the writings, and we see कि the religious deal is missing, like comparatively missing from the Delhi Sultanate sources. And some Sufi, like in my research in the Persian documents, there was a Persian poet named Urfi Shirazi. So he has composed a sher in Persian which is Chirage Somnath hast atishe tur Bud zan har zahat ra nur dar nur, which translates to yeah. The lamp of Somnath is the same as the fire at Sinai. The light spread all around from both of them. So this is the only positive representation of Somnath in all of the Muslim sources. Urfi Shirazi was a Shia from Iran. He wanted to tell the Sinai mountain, which is revered for Muslims and Christians, and the Somnath, it is all same because the light of wisdom comes from both of them. Now obviously it is the effect of Akbar, and because Urfi Shirazi himself was a heretic, not a very pious Muslim. Then moving forward, we come to Aurangzeb, and I was searching Rukayat-e Alamgiri, and there was a letter of Aurangzeb. So what happens? Aurangzeb was writing a letter to some of his noble who has encountered a dervish. Now, dervish is a Muslim saint, and dervish, he was claiming that I have some superpowers. I can show this, I can show that. So Aurangzeb was mentioning to his nobleman, ki invite that dervish tomorrow to your court, and if he cannot perform his magic, punish him. And in that letter, Aurangzeb mentioned because Sultan Mahmud, who was also against the heretics, and that is why I love him, I like him, because he never tolerated heretics in his court. So that is interesting because Aurangzeb was also aware about what Mahmud did, and maybe that explains that Aurangzeb was the only Mughal king who ordered to destroy Somnath, which was already in the dilapidated condition. Maybe because he was influenced by Mahmud and wanted to inscribe his name on that list. Moving forward, there was a very interesting verse I want to point out, which is by Allama Iqbal, the revisionist, and he wrote a sher, and I want to read it. क्या नहीं और गजनवी कारगे हयात में बैठे हैं कब से मुंतजिर अहले हरम सोमनाथ. So the verse, the means you can read, is there not another Ghaznavi in the world? Muslims are waiting for something like Somnath to happen again. So I want to contextualize. He was in Palestine when he was writing this, and there was this crisis of the Palestine movement. And Allama Iqbal, by Somnath, he is pointing to Palestine, and Ghaznavi, he is longing for some Islamic hero who will come and destroy the Somnath, maybe fix the problem of Palestine. So we see that through all the Muslim sources, Somnath was not just a raid or a plunder or even a religious motive. Somnath was used to express the Islamic supremacy over the pagan beliefs of Hindus, the ignorance of idol worshippers, and it was a call to Muslims to raise them from slumber. Whenever any king was weak in dealing with the Hindus, everyone reminded them of Mahmud, because Mahmud became the idol mythical Islamic ruler who destroyed the Somnath. So I want to conclude some of my points. I want to acknowledge that the Muslim sources upon which I have relied my paper in large measure are the products of Ghaznavid code. Many historians argue that the sources are glorifying Mahmud because they were written by the court poets and they have vested interest. But this objection, while not without merit, does not withstand sustained scrutiny for several reasons. The convergence of religious framing across sources of vastly different periods, genres, and geographical origins, from the court poetry of Farooqi to the chronicle of Ali Muhammad Khan, cannot be explained away just as courtly flattery. If the religious interpretation was simply an artifice of mere court flattery, one would expect it to dissolve once the Ghaznavid dynasty itself had collapsed. But the later writers had no political reason to perpetuate it. Yet the religious framing not only persisted but intensified across subsequent centuries and dynasties, suggesting that it corresponded to something that Muslim writers across the Islamic world genuinely understood the raid to represent. So the sources which I have used are not a transparent windows into Mahmud's inner motivation, which no historical source can promise, but they constitute a consistent and mutually corroborating body of evidence that the raid was understood, conceived, and publicly represented as an act of religious warfare, and that this understanding originated with Mahmud himself. Yeah. So now I want to a short critique of the contemporary scholarship, like Jay has already done, of the legitimacy argument of Eaton and all, but I want to highlight two important arguments of Thapar, because she argued in her book on Somnath that the Muslim sources have given due attention, over attention, and the Jain sources and the Sanskrit sources, which some of the sources Alok presented, have not given duly attention. The problem with Sanskrit and Jain sources are none of the Sanskrit sources even mention the name of Mahmud. So if today like suppose we don't have the Muslim sources, people like Thapar have alleged that Somnath was destroyed by the sectarian strife among Shaiva and Vaishnava, and we have virtually nothing to corroborate that someone Mahmud came. So the problem with Sanskrit sources are they are not very contemporary and they don't mention the Mahmud. They mention that the site was like worship, the resilience and all, but they don't mention the raid at all. So yeah. And the one main point in Eater in his book India and the Persianides tries to draw equivalence between the raid of Rajendra Chola in North India to Mahmud, raid at Somnath. So please can we move to that slide? Yeah. So I have tried to highlight the basic difference. I have also mailed Eaton because he claimed that Rajan during his raid seized the temple, seized the idol from Mahipal, which was the chief deity of Mahipal, because that carried legitimacy. So I was shocked that there is just no primary source mentioning this. So I mailed Eaton and he replied that this was just architectural evidence. I also don't have any primary source. So even if we assume that like Rajendra seized some idol and all, he consecrated it into a temple, and the Rajan's raid was not a religious raid. It was a military raid, and scholars like Neelakanta Shastri have even pointed out that the motive of Rajendra was pilgrimage, not war. Summing up my argument, Thapar has also, can we move to the next slide? Yeah. So Thapar cites Ray and Multan as a strategic raid. So Ray is a city in Iran, which Mahmud raided in 1029. So Thapar tried to project that, okay, Mahmud raided Muslim centers too along with Hindu centers. So there's no problem. So Ray was an Shia city. But the thing is that the primary motive at Ray was not religious. Because if you see the map, Ray was at the border of the Ghaznavid Empire. And at that time, Ray was ruled by an indolent ruler. So in 10th century, it was a like natural provocation. If yes, some kingdom is on your boundary and it is not ruled by a competent king, but Somnath, which was situated thousands of miles away from your borders, and I have wrote in my paper that Ujjain and Varanasi, which was city like of great religious significance, it was closer to what Ghaznavid had raided earlier, because he has come far as Gwalior and all, but he chose Somnath all of a sudden because he was aware about the stories and how significant it was for Hindus. So concluding my paper, the foregoing analysis has traced the representation of Mahmud's raid on Somnath across more than 9 centuries of Muslim literary production, from Al-Baruni and the triumphal verse of Farooqi in the 11th century to political poetry of Iqbal. This survey shows that the destruction of Somnath came to embody for the Muslim literary and political imagination the very idea of Islamic supremacy over the idol worshipping Hindus. The consistency of this representation across dynasties, genres, languages, and centuries is itself the most compelling argument against reducing the raid to an act of economic opportunism. The religious motive behind the raid need not to be understood as the exclusive motive to total exclusion of all others. Mahmud was simultaneously a Muslim, an ambitious sovereign, a military commander, and these identities were not contradictory. But the wealth of Somnath, which was undoubtedly known to him, and its plunder was a welcome consequence of the campaign. But the deliberate desecration of the idol, its transportation to Ghazna, and Mahmud's own letter to the caliphs framing the raid as a service of Islam does not account for economic motivation alone. The raid on Somnath was in the end both an act of plunder and an act of faith, but it was immortalized only for faith, not plunder. Nobody remembered, no source remembers Somnath because it was very wealthy. None of them. Like there were many temples which were destroyed, but the Somnath was remembered just because it was a matter of faith. Because temples wealthier than Somnath had been sacked and forgotten, the Ghaznavid itself crumbled within decades of Mahmud's death. What endured was the memory of a blow struck against the most celebrated idol of Hind, a memory that Muslim writers from Gardiji to Iqbal continued to invoke as a call to religious purpose. To flatten this memory into mere economic calculation is not to rescue history from communalism, it is to impoverish it. Thank you.
Questions, please. Last session, I know, but yeah, we could end. Yes.
Thank you to both the presenters. Excellent presentation. So, as somebody from a non-history background, I want to understand that when we look at the work of these left historians, what motives do we attribute to the kind of work that they have done? That is one. And were they experts in languages like Sanskrit, Prakrit, Persian, to be able to decipher sources in the way that they did? And since they've kind of borrowed from a Marxist framework, which is definitely not not a dharmic framework, not an Indian framework. So, uh, how do they then talk about decolonization? It was a very interesting presentation, and this whole exploration of Muslim sources that you have done is also very interesting. And I feel that this deserves space in mainstream academic institutions. This should be taught across all disciplines: political science, sociology, history, linguistics. That is when the impact will be manifold. Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, there are three sub questions. I've already forgotten the middle one. The first is, what are the motives, right? The motive, I would first integrate the first and the last question. You said it's not a dharmic framework. They don't want a dharmic framework. That's the very reason they are taking a Marxist framework to look at Indian history. They don't attribute the sense of reverence, the sense of respect, or the sense of credibility to the sources that we already have. We already have our own sources, right? Why to go and figure out some different methodology to look into the sources that we already have? Because they don't trust our framework. Dharma is based on trust, dharma is based on belief. They don't trust the dharma. So, how can they trust the framework itself? So, the first thing is they disown whatever literature that we have, they disown the institutions that we build, the Guru Shishya Parampara, everything is questioned. So, when everything which is organic to us, which is indigenous to us, is questioned, you look for something that discredits it much more. And that's a framework called Marxist framework. Marx actually did not write in detail about Indian society. He just put forth one model, Asiatic mode of production. He did not even visit India. So that entire narrative is taken on just one text of Marx, and then you discredit it. So you take it to discredit your own history. So that's the motive. Because they want to build a history where they do not listen to the mainstream voice, but they listen to everyone else. So that's the motive. I don't know the second question. Can you repeat it?
The second question was about their lack of knowledge or expertise in the language in which these sources could be approached, like Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, or any other indigenous language, to be able to develop such a mountain of falsehood and entrench it in mainstream academia, media, and so many other spaces, even in pop culture. You need to have some credibility, and after some point of time, you would know that your work is not credible, it will be challenged and destroyed. But unfortunately, is sustained for so long and damaged the fabric of our nation. So, did these historians have knowledge of these languages?
Unfortunately, I don't know. The historians that I studied, when it comes to D.D. Kosambi, who writes extensively or who criticizes extensively the Sanskrit scriptures, or Romila Thapar, who writes extensively on Persian accounts, I genuinely don't know the kind of expertise they have. But I think I would like to give them a chance.
As far as I know, Thapar does not know Sanskrit, but Eaton knows Persian. Yeah, obviously, if you know language, you have an upper edge. But I don't believe that if you don't know, like you cannot write anything. Obviously, you can. You can analyze sources because most of that are now translated. But obviously, if you know the language, you have an upper end also because Thapar was such an reputed and like popular in ancient history once upon a time. She must have known Persian, but all she has done is a 6-month certificate course in Europe and Sanskrit. That's all I know. She had himself like told that.
Thank you, thank you.
The resounding answer to that question is a no. Most of them, or almost all of them, and they've been on record, including someone like Irfan Habib, who has come on record to state that I don't know Persian or Arabic. And so you are either always relying on Western translations of it, or you are distorting it in such a way, because I think the fundamental takeaway from this session is the tragedy of us in Bharat, that our history is written in languages that none of us understand. So it is so unfortunate that a neighbor will come and explain to us how our mother looks, and we are unable to talk to her in the language that she understands. Whether it is Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, Pali, whatever. When we talk of the Marxist framework, I think it's wonderfully put, where I think Shreya took the meta narrative as to what the framework was, and Pushkar went into the details, particularly with respect to Persian, which is important. So they say history is a constant dialogue between the historian and his or her sources. So it is up to the historian to decide what source he or she will pick. And then comes the second layer of interpretation of that source. And both of that come within a larger framework. I think a very important takeaway here is, as what Shreya very rightly mentioned, and probably which ties to the morning session of Shatrubodh, where instead of doing ad hominem attacks on some of these individuals, which I think our side does love to do that, I think developing that very systematic academic critique, and I agree that more in academic forums and so on, this should be mainstreamed, where first of all that framework has to be dismantled. That is one part. The other part is, what is the alternative framework that we talk of? We do say Indic framework, Indic lens, but what exactly would that entail? I think a lot of work needs to be done there too, because can we also, how do we just rationalize, justify, say, a Puranic concept of one king ruling for 1 lakh years? Things like this. Is it a Atishayokti? How are we going to make sense of it in a modern, rational, scientific world? I think we have a lot of work there to be done. Even as we are fighting about dating the Mahabharat war, the Ramayana, when was Ram born and all that. I think it's a very complicated thing to even look at the Hindu chronology. Is the chronology that we have really what it is, or it is something much more ancient? I think a lot of work needs to go on that.
Yeah, because I think that even though this presentation was about history, it impacts other disciplines as well. So I'll just give you a simple example. I had invited Nitin Sridharji for an online talk in my department. And the moment the talk was titled Stree Dharm, there was so much of ruckus created about it. And because I wanted to have him interact with my students, I had to request him to change the title of that talk, even though I know that the authority understood, but they didn't want to be in the crossfire with the administration, so they didn't want to use a term like Sridham. So this narrative is impacting even a discipline like media and culture studies, and then it's creating that impact through social media and popular culture.
Any other questions? Raghavji.
What would be 1 or 3 things that will help you guys in your research or in whatever you're pursuing right now? Because you mentioned that we'll need to start the generative work. We need to have our own framework. So when you're looking at history and you're trying to deconstruct Marxist frame, and you want to have an alternative, what is the support, or what kind of knowledge or institutional support do you think will help that?
To begin with, I feel it's a very evolutionary thing. Rather than talking just the middle part of it, that we have to create seminars or conferences, because it starts from the childhood itself. The parents that we have today, they are consistently putting kids in international boards or equivalent to that. What we need is the reverence that we gave to Guru Shishya Parampara to begin with. We need the Vedic schools. We need to respect them. And we need such curriculum that brings, that actually justifies parents that this will lead to holistic development, and this will actually lead to them earning in this economy as well, and them developing as a good individual, because parents will of course look at economic aspect. We cannot only say that we are building dharmic individuals, we also need the artha aspect of it, that parents usually look at when they send the students to these boards. So this is just one part of it. The other part of it could be we have very individual authors, Sitaram Goyal ji, R.C. Majumdar, or Binakshi Jain ji. Now, when we have these individual authors, what we have is just one particular source for one particular issue. We need to integrate those sources. We need to take the lessons or frameworks out of it. We are not supposed to build framework excluding them, but including them. Because we have our own individual sources. The only work that is remaining is just making frameworks out of it, theories out of it. Because this is exactly what Romila Thapar and all have done. They already had people who had the foundation. I'm not telling to copy them, but I'm just saying that we have our primary sources. We have our kavyas, we have our Rigveds. So we can make it much more accessible to them, to the kids. So they can easily come up and they can read it. And they can discuss among the peers as well. So these conferences and all that we take for the age group that I belong to, I think it should also be for them. Even if they do not understand the core concept, I think that's the very core of it. So they can at least discuss it. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank Vikram Sampath sir. FIHCR is doing one of the great things which is need to be done. I think more such institutions need to be built. More such scholarships need to be come up with more such scholarships, internships, like Indica, what Indica build master class and all. More such courses need to come up. Like Brhat also, I remember 2-3 years ago there was some course on understanding Ram Sarup, Sitaram Goyal. So more such courses, more such scholarships, seminars like this need to come up, more bigger seminars and more but I think we are in the right direction. We need doers, not mourners. We don't need to complain all the time. We need people to work upon and it will be fine.
Any other questions or comments anyone has? I think just to briefly answer, Raghavji, the first thing, the problem, I think when we talk of, I think as a group, we need to understand what is the Indic framework of history. Maybe for the other IK subjects, there is a clearer articulation. And history is complicated. It is layered. And so I think that is why that escapes the entire, even IK's framework sometimes. Contested, yeah, of course. The multiplicity of views. And I think source critique need not be considered as being irreverential to the text or to the yes. So the robust element of source critique which we need to develop through, I think, the strength of the Indic framework, if we so say, should be a very clear understanding of the language. Whether it is Sanskrit or Persian or any of the other Indian languages, that we are relying on primary sources as they are. And someday, I think it is a huge project to actually work together to fix this entire thing of chronology. I think people like Vedveer Aryaji and others are working on, but then that challenges the entire, trip. Ashoka would not be where we place him right now. The Mauryan Empire might go. Some of them say it was Chandragupta, the Gupta king, and not the Maurya king whom Alexander, attacked, and so on. So, there are multiple problems there. And when we date the Mahabharata, we do all of this. So I think first of all, I don't know, AI may be a good thing to just put all our 18 Puranas, the Vamshavalis that are there in them, to see what are the commonalities. Is there some kind of chronological table that can come out of it? Because all of them would mention. So if you look at, I'm currently working very closely with Raja Tarangini, and if you go exactly by Kalhana's chronology, Ashoka is probably 1,500 years before where he is right now, even before what we think of the historical Buddha. So that begs the question: are there multiple Buddhas? Shankaracharya's, we had a paper on Adi Shankaracharya, but Adi Shankara itself is a contested figure. We think of him as an 8th century historical figure, whereas the 3 of the 4 mutts, I think, take him back to 500 BC. So if it's 500 BCE and thereabouts, much before Buddha was born, so are we saying Shankara's Advaita came before Buddha? Or does that make Buddha go even farther in the past? So these are very foundational questions they could be right or wrong, because of course the Indic argument has been the Westerners tried to reduce the antiquity so that everything was BC and AD and not too far away from the death of Christ. Our Vedas were just 1500 BC, so we're not such an ancient. Maybe that is true, but what is the other alternative? I think that thing is not known. So I think a lot of work needs to go with language scholars, with historians, with if you really need to put a dharmic framework, so to say, to Indian history, at the same time also to understand what a Western framework, sounds like. So I think that kind of sums up also what we tried to bring out through this symposium. Thank you to both the speakers for excellent presentations, and thank you everyone. I think we now move to the last valedictory address. Over to you, Prasad.
Thank you to the chair and the presenters for the wonderful session. We will now be joined by Shree Sahitya Tak ji, live from Delhi. Please allow us a few minutes while we set up the call. He's here. Before he begins, it is my pleasure to introduce Shree Sahitya Tak ji, a senior advocate by profession. He practices primarily before the Supreme Court, the Delhi High Court, and the NCLAT. He's an alumnus of Anna University and IIT Kharagpur. He began his career with Sai Krishna and Associates before founding the law chambers of Sahitya Tak in 2016. He's also the best-selling author of India That Is Bharat and India, Bharat and Pakistan. I now request Shree Sahitya Tak ji to address the audience.
Namaste. Am I visible? Am I audible? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, FIHCR and Brhat, for putting together this wonderful event in this auspicious venue, this historic venue. And I'm grateful that finally I've been fortunate enough to secure space alongside Sri Kapil Kapoor, who I truly think is the tapasvi that all of us look up to when it comes to historiography. So I genuinely hope that I don't embarrass myself in his presence when I speak on a subject which he is a master of and just relates to it. I'm also grateful to specifically to Vikram Sampath, who's a dear friend, and Raghavji, who's also a very dear friend, for the work that they've undertaken at a policy level to set right certain legacy issues which have haunted us for generations. And I hope that they manage to, and I'm sure, I'm actually positive, they will come out with brilliant scholars who can be trained under their guidance and the guidance of universities like Dr. Kapil Kapoor. I've just come from court, so my sincere apologies if there is incoherence in the way I speak, or if there is lack of coherence in the script, which I usually don't have. So let me just start with, I think, a couple of issues which I think are important. The topic, I think, for this session is the falsehood of left historiography. I think I have done my fair share to my limited capacity in terms of exposing the falsehood of leftist historiography, which I think is perhaps the easiest thing to do. I think the next few years, and hopefully not decades, will require us to confront the problems with the non-left historiography as well, where there are two sets of problems that I see. One is the acceptance of the frameworks of the left, the worldview of the left, and the facts presented by the left, if they can be called so, in an unthinking fashion. I have never operated with the belief or under the assumption that everything that the left has to present is of no value whatsoever. Accepting some aspect that the left may present doesn't necessarily make us left. It only means that on certain issues we are capable of applying our own Viveka filters and accepting if there is truth and sense and logic. The third, rather, the problem is people, as I mentioned. One is the framework, the second is the worldview, and third, of course, is the other fact, isn't it? Now, it's one thing for that historiography to occupy an isolated academic space. But if our experience tells us history has rarely been left in rarefied academic years as far as Bharat is concerned, what is taught in colleges and schools becomes the basis for formation of opinions and worldviews of the future. It then gets rolled into policy action before it becomes a political tool, and that's how it is typically worked. That process would be wonderful if it is based in reality, if it is based in or grounded in good intentions, with a sound understanding of how Bharatiya, specifically Sanatani, Darshanik, and let's say theological worldviews operate. I could be wrong, and I've been pillory for saying this in the past, but nevertheless, I think it's important for us to speak the truth somewhere. I think we are way past the sell-by date of bashing the left. I think that job has been done significantly over the last 6-7 years, thanks to the work of several, let's say, legends and authors and stalwarts in their own right, including Dr. Sampath, Sanjeev Sanyal, and others. And let's say, peer to authors like me who built up works of stalwarts of the past and the present. Now I think it's time to look inward and correct some of the legacy issues that continue to haunt us. And I think there are two sets of issues that I'd like to point out in terms of areas of hope, if I may put it that way. First is the question of understanding the outgroup, and therefore what are these external threats in terms of the threats that have existed in the past and how they continue to be present. And I also believe, as academics or historiographers, it is not enough if we merely archive or chronicle the past. We must also endeavor to formulate solutions which have a policy impact in the present. So one of the things that I think that organizations like FIHCR and their wonderful synergy produces is a think tank that produces wonderful history and has lessons for the present, which then gets crystallized into policy recommendations through policy think tanks such as GitHub. And that synergy, I think, is something that we should have arrived at long ago. Finally, it's happening, and I'm so happy that I'm in a generation where I'm able to see its work, and I will continue to be around hopefully for decades to see how this plays out, and I will actively support in every way I can. It's always been said, maybe with a certain sense of angst, anxiety, or even retribution, that since the left has done this with the support of the state, maybe the non-left too must replicate it. But increasingly, I am of the view that the state's role in crafting of history, regardless of who is in power, is deeply problematic. That is perhaps something that is best left to experts. And hopefully, the state will leave that issue to experts to fashion and present itself as a multiplier platform or an amplifying platform with a megaphone in hand, as opposed to interfering with the integrity of the content and its loyalty, truth, and facts. So these institutions and these organizations, which are populated by people who are subject matter experts, with a clear sense of understanding of how the subject is to be approached, with respect for dharma, with reverence and veneration for Bharat Mata, which are prerequisites, according to me, if one wants to serve this civilization through the cause of history or through the medium of history. And the larger issue that I think we will have to address as we go along is the convergence of history, theology, and ontology, where we will have to address the questions which have been banished from public spaces thanks to the advent of secularism and modernity, which is the ornamental role that spirituality has been relegated to, which is the foundation of Bharat as a civilization, as a society. And maybe someday we will once again become comfortable talking about consciousness-related issues, rituals, spirituality, yajnas, homas, from public platforms in public spaces without any sense of shame or self-loathing or embarrassment. That I would think would be the ultimate success in terms of our internal success points or metrics. From an external perspective is to break the stereotype that we are so introspective, that we are insular and we are isolationist without any attempt at engaging with the rest of the world. Nothing could be further from the truth if one were to look at the Aryan spirit's ambitions or its ability to action its will on the ground. And I use the word Aryan responsibly in a non-racial sense, from a consciousness perspective, as a product of this civilization. And I would hope that our historiography also has the ability to build networks and alliances across the world, so that the message of Bharat is not limited to a bunch of stereotypes through graveyards built by Mughal invaders and or stereotypes surrounding Bollywood. And Bharatiya history, spirituality, valor, science, and contributions across the pool of human thought becomes a matter of common knowledge to the rest of the world. And we're able to use history as a tool, not a weapon, to build alliances, to effect course correction, and hopefully achieve truth and reconciliation, and trigger the revival of, let's say, natural systems, proto-dharmic systems, or dharmic clonal systems across the world through revival of polytheistic systems across the world. Because I believe that Hindus are safer in a polytheistic world compared to a monochromatic world. So in the interest of our own safety and also in the interest of expanding dharma, our goal must be to revive that across the world and build alliances wherever possible. I don't believe in interfaith dialogues which are meaningless according to me, because those interfaith dialogues try to find if one is the same as the other. We must perhaps operate with the assumption that even if we are not, so what? And those differences must be accepted so long as it doesn't result in the need to annihilate one another. So political spheres of influence, along with theological and historical spheres of influence, those three layers is how I see the way of the future. And obviously, none of this is going to be possible purely through academics. I understand the value of power as a constitutional lawyer and a civil commercial litigator. Therefore, I operate in the realm of economics and power and institutional power in that sense. So I don't operate under any idealistic assumptions of how this can be done by the poor private or the poor academic themselves. That's not right. We need money, we need power, and we also need the media and conduits to get the job done to push the message as much as possible as far as possible. That said, I would wish, and this is a genuine auspicious hope, that platforms and initiatives in this direction never run out of resources whatsoever. And hopefully they don't have to depend on state largesse to get the job done. They can depend on the state to create a path, but the money should come from society to increase stakeholdership as widely as possible. And I remember one of these legendary speeches, lectures of Dr. Kapoor, where he specifically said that there was a point in Hindu history when every rich person would want to be seen as contributing to two things. One is expansion of the Veda and the protection of the cow, Veda Pathshalas and Goshalas. And I hope that we come back to a point where these define prosperity, success, and character more than material possessions. And I say this as someone who has who doesn't celebrate poverty. I certainly don't celebrate poverty, but I know that resources, material prosperity cannot be the end goals. They are the means to an end, and hopefully a spiritual end. And if they themselves become the means of the goals, then the kind of dystopian society that all of us will be living in, we could perhaps look at the West to see how all of that would end. And I use the word end in a very responsible. So not just in the sense of a destination, but that would literally be the end of the Western civilization. So the task, the vision, and the scope of the goals that we have cut out for ourselves, I think it's huge and vast, which means there's a lot of scope for accommodating a lot of people. And therefore, we need not be bogged down by unhealthy competitive spirits. I think there must be a spirit of cooperation as much as possible, respecting the other's strength while being cognizant of one's own strength, and finding ways to complement, synergize, and multiply or amplify. I think that's the way to go forward. I'm so happy that we are in a generation when we can see the institutionalization of such initiatives through private action, along with the kind of support that's coming from the government, which needs to be recognized in the context of Indic knowledge systems, with a wider ecosystem playing its role in terms of generating talent and providing platforms and creating audiences. Well, all three are important. The messenger, the message, the platform, and the audience. In that sense, I think it's a rectangular, it's a quadrangular equation. I genuinely don't wish to sit and hold forth on certain aspects of history, because that would be an insult to the presence of someone like Dr. Kapil Kapoor. I will close my remarks on this subject at this point. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Just one perhaps housekeeping issue. I'm looking at the poster, so I don't know if I'm speaking to an audience or not. So at this point, it seems as if I'm speaking to myself, and I'm very uncomfortable. Am I allowed to take any questions? Is it possible to take questions through this medium?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
This is Raghav here, Saigaru. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. So we've had a fantastic day, and I can say that you would have loved to be here, because young scholars have presented an entire range of very, very critical presentations. And I think we didn't plan it this way, but your summary just now sort of brought it all together, because you're talking about the environment and how enabling environment needs to come together for the scholarship to become impactful. So thank you for that. Just one maybe reflection from your side on some of the cases that you are fighting now, and what would be good historical scholarship from our side that can help. How can we assist you?
I'm so grateful for this question. I think it's a wonderful application-oriented question. Thank you for it. One, just so that I clarify my role as well. I'm fundamentally a hard-nosed commercial litigator who loves constitutional law, or let's say public international law as a subject. Therefore, I've brought my hard-nosed skills as a commercial litigator to bear on the causes I believe in, because I believe that if constitutional law is left exclusively to constitutional lawyers, then I think we will suffer, because I don't think that should happen, because they have a tendency to get extremely activistic as opposed to having a very practical approach. Now, to answer your specific question, here are the areas that I think we could be working on. One, I think aspects relating to reservation policies have not been supported with historical data or hard studies, at least of the last 200 to 300 years, to support some of the axiomatic assumptions in respect of this oppression or oppressor-oppressed framework, which the Indian state buys lock, stock, and barrel, regardless of who wields the reins of power. So I do believe that on the aspect of policy making, including the realm of courts and justiciability of policies, or judicial review of policies, Jati-related, Varna-related literature needs to come out without any pixelation of the truth. We will have to accept history with all its non-linearity, with its warts, and we have to find ways to deal with it in the present. So that's one thing that I would suggest as one potential homework area. Second is, increasingly I see two different trends. One, there is a reawakening with respect to the importance of ritual and its connection to spirituality. And therefore, the stupidity of spiritual but not religious is hopefully on the decline. So maybe what exactly does it translate to? How have rituals kept communities alive and community memory alive? And what is its actual relationship with an inward journey? I think that's one aspect, because I see a lot of questions coming my way from Gen Z on subject, those who want to be invited into the fold. Three, a much neglected area in the realm of studies from the non-left is environment. And we typically speak of environment from an archival perspective, or we try and connect with pilgrimages. But what are the concrete environmental policies that we are in a position to offer solutions to the Indian state when it is looking at lifting millions of people out of poverty? How do you actually redefine sustainable development or development for the Indian state? Because any suggestion that comes from people who speak for environment are dismissed as impractical, unreasonable, and in the realm of theory or in the realm of fiction, where we are being told that you're only harkening back to an ancient past, you don't know how to live in the present, and you don't know the way of the future for sure. That's what we are being told. So I'd like to understand what is it that we can do. So environment, that's one. Three, the aspect of gender politics. The aspect of gender politics is extremely important. It's a weapon that will not die soon. So the sooner we find a response to it, the better. And I expect policy institutions and judicial institutions to be occupied with these issues significantly in the foreseeable future, notwithstanding the outcome of the 9 judgments, Sabarimala that's currently underway. And I think we should stop responding. We need to create some proactive frameworks and let's say literature. I shudder to use the word narrative, because although that seems to be the battle of narratives, I'm just wary of the word because it has a propagandist undertone to it. So I'm just speaking of production of scholarship and literature, not narrative. And of course, the other aspect is that there are quite a few unseen forces whose presence we don't wish to spell out, or whose animus towards Bharatiya society we still don't wish to spell out for reasons of geopolitics and for reasons of pragmatism. But we also need to look at history from a geopolitical perspective. And I don't think geopolitics should be studied in a standalone fashion. It is a spin-off of history. So as part of your larger, let's say, vision, international relations or at least geopolitics needs to follow. And as I mentioned the previous subject, I think it's also important to consider the language wars or region-related wars. Bharat is seen as a crucible to stir up these kinds of sentiments. So these are the areas that I would certainly look at. I can assure you that inevitably, one way or another, these issues will land up in the court of courts. So there is practically no subject or issue in the public sphere which cannot be rolled into legal action anymore. If anything, Sabarimala is proof of that. Nobody would have ever expected an Indian constitutional court to intervene with Holi, with Dahi Handi, with kite flying, with Jallikattu, with what is this Sabarimala, God knows what else. So these are the areas, and if and when I have any further suggestions, I'll certainly share. But these are my star-marked areas, highlights.
Thank you, Sai. I hope you're able to hear me.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Hello, good evening. This is Vikram here. Thank you so much for joining, despite I know you have a very grueling schedule today, and for your excellent points, despite having to speak to yourself on the screen. I had two questions. One was, as a public intellectual, in addition to being an accomplished lawyer, you're closely watching the growth of this parallel movement, or the whatever you could talk of it as the Indic Renaissance and so on, since the last decade or so. And whether one likes it or not, it does get influenced by the politics of the time, the changing regimes and so on. The same thing could not have perhaps been possible 15 or 20 years before. And we do all acknowledge how scholars such as Sitaramji or Dharampalji, Meenakshi Jain, Konrad Elst, all of them suffered against the system. But with some amount of future gazing, and as you know, everything that goes up also goes down. Somewhere when the tide changes politically, do you see this movement also, which is now largely and thankfully, as you rightly said, outside the clutches of state control? As much as we bemoan it all the time, it's a blessing in disguise. The opponent is not going to be so pragmatic enough to let 1,000 flowers bloom. The state is then going to come with an iron fist and crush whatever has been achieved so far. So as someone who's also looking at this, do you foresee this problem in the future? That is my first question. The second question is, we are situating this entire symposium, this conversation from this place, Somnath, which luckily did not have a contestation in courts of law. And despite the rancor of Nehru and other things, it still had a very easy path to its re-establishment. You have also been an advocate of wanting to reclaim all the destroyed temples. And that is more of a historical question than a legal question, because the lawyer needs to be then given 1,000 pages of proof and evidence if it is a property dispute that is going to court. So how do you see that panning out? Or is it going to be the likes of Vishnu Jain and you and others just going from court to court, filing cases against each and every, how many ever, we don't even know the number, from 1,800 of Sitaramji to 40,000, 1 lakh, God knows what. So how does one deal with that issue? Thank you.
Thank you. I think only a distilled, deep, incisive mind could have thought of these questions. So thank you, Vikram, for these questions. First, let me say this clearly, just so that there is no confusion whatsoever, because sometimes I think the nuance is lost in the hope of getting sound bites, and that's what happens on social media. So, for the benefit of this enlightened audience, let me make this point very clear. No one who is a student of Bharatiya history, especially in the last 1,500 years, can discount the importance, essentiality, and integrality of power. architect, power is something that makes everything possible. Because at the end of the day, it is the sword of the Kshatriya which allows dharma to flourish. So to dismiss or discount, let's say, the necessity of power is to discount the necessity of kshatriya. But the point, I think, which people usually forget is kshatriya emanates from the concept of dharma. Therefore, the presence of state to enable what we do is important, because even if the state does not take up, let's say, active initiatives on its own, the best part of the last 12 years is that there have been no active barriers as such. If anything, people are able to speak up clearly and openly. Of course, contrary to popular perception, at least as some people would like people to believe, I have been speaking of this issue, at least from my engineering days. I have gotten into fist fights, physical fights on campuses. When Center-Right India was the portal, which exists in a different avatar today, I wrote under a pseudonym, and I openly started writing under my name even in 2011, much before the current dispensation came to power. So, what I'm trying to say is the presence of a power, or let's say of an establishment that is not antithetical to your point of view, obviously has a huge role to play. But it also means if the state decides to take an active interest in dictating the course of fashioning history in terms of historiography, it is bound to be colored by some considerations, some compromises, some concessions, and some monkey balancing, all of which do grave injustice to truth. So I would want the state to create atmospherics, or at least not create obstacles and allow us to flourish. Now, to answer the question of what happens when, let's say, an inimical, let's say, government comes to power, here's how I would see it. I would still want the ecosystem to be decentralized, because we have seen the power of decentralization in Iran's response to Israel and America in action on the ground, where people are asked to fire. There's a reason why we have never been captured as a whole ever as a country, despite these waves of invasions, because there is constantly been response across the country to different places. That is centrality of civilization in thought and decentralization in action, because there are multiple free radical agents trying to take a pot shot at the enemy, at the adversary, so that the enemy never gets to sleep in peace and is dragged into a 27-year war the way Orwell does. Second, the importance of creating a legal framework, or let's say a steel barricade of lawyers around, let's say, academics like you, scholars like you, is super important. It's super important. Even if this comes as self-service suggestion, so there's a reason why I chose this profession, which is to stand and to stand guard and make sure that we are at least the second line of defense and the first line of defense before somebody goes past us. People should shudder to touch you, because they should realize that there is an army of lawyers with supremely, let's say, talented bunch of youngsters with deep knowledge, with voracious reading and the commitment to fight. And that's the one thing that the left has done brilliantly. Every activist has the support of a competent lawyer, not just a passionate lawyer, but a competent lawyer, who's not activisty, but who knows how the system works, how the institution works, and who knows how to, let's say, present his point of view in a manner that the forum can accept it. Then you also need a host of people who are not to your levels of, let's say, rigor or scholarship, but who know how to reach out to the general public through general writing, through lay writing, which is an art in itself. Because creation of opinion and rousing of people's opinion is important. And which is why I believe that nobody should operate under the assumption that we can do the job alone. No ecosystem can do it. We need the politicians, we need the lawyers, we need the street activists, we need the people who are journalists in the media who can fashion our point of view and present to the public. And we also need the core knowledge group who are actually in the B direction, like people like you. But in fact, according to me, The choral people are the people at the absolute epicenter are our gurus, our sampradayas. That's where everything comes from. So that's how I see how this could pan out. Because I've always said, in a way, it's been a blessing in disguise that we've all had to do our bit on our own. And we have done this living in states and regions and at points of time when it's not as if a pro-Hindu dispensation was in the helm. And I always prepare for it because democracy can be a very fickle game. It can do anything overnight. We have just seen proof of that a few days ago on 4th of May. So preparing for that is absolutely crucial. Therefore, there needs to be multiple fallback safety mechanisms, plan B, plan C, plan D, because there should never be a break or a cessation or interruption to the work. It needs to continue no matter what. In this regard, we have a lot to learn from Bharatiya Sampradayik systems because despite waves of invasion, they managed to keep traditions alive. So why is it that we're not looking at those institutions and those mechanisms for transmission of knowledge and preservation of these structures? We need to look at them. The concept of Sampradaya indicates two things. One is that there is a Guru Shishya Parampara and therefore there is a transmission line and there is adherence to that both. So how do we create an Indic knowledge system Sampradaya or a historiography Sampradaya is the question we need to ask. You're better at it. I'm just posing the question accordingly. The solution lies. What was your second question, Vikram? Yes, okay, reclamation. Okay. On the question of reclamation, some things can be addressed by power, just as I said, taking away the need to approach the court for everything. That's possible. But when power chooses not to do so for reasons best known to it, our independent existence and our independent voices act as, let's say, points of pressure points to continue to push the envelope and constantly create the chatter, the noise, the ruckus, the choruses. And here, I do believe that the legal fraternity, which believes in our worldview, must tie up with institutions such as yours to create a repository of literature, and not just weaponizable or actionable literature in courts, but on a regular basis, this needs to translate to publication of scholarship in mainstream portals, so that that envelope is constantly pushed. What the left banks on is that it is relentless in pushing its idea under every circumstance and every situation to every platform possible. And they have replacements for everyone. And I don't think we have reached a stage where there are replacements for a Vikram Sampata, Sanjeev Sanyal, or anybody for that matter. Therefore, we need to start looking at churning out a Raktabija Rakshas from a dharmic perspective in favor of them. I repeat, power is important, but you should prepare for the day when you don't have power. And when the diffusion of this point of view is so much in the society that people in power must find it extremely difficult to control this voice. I want that once. We haven't reached that stage yet. And one of the things that initiative like yours makes it clear is that you can't outsource everything to the state, not because you can't trust the state, but also because the state is a creature of, it's a fickle creature. It keeps changing. So I hope that answers the question.
Hello, am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Pushkar. So I want to ask, like, we always hear like about the cases in Supreme Court and all about the temple, like the reclamation part. But I want to ask, like, I'm not a student of law and constitution. Is there enough provision in constitution or space that the temple can be reclaimed by the constitutional or legal method by any means, like the sites which were desecrated and destroyed?
So actually, if the places of worship act had not been around, the standard remedy is to file a suit the way people filed a suit for Kamdam. It was not a special legislation that was created for the reclamation of Ayodhya. It was through a standard civil suit in a district court, Faizabad district court, which was then transferred to the Allahabad. So the constitutional remedy is all the legal remedies available to the devotees in any form, in any manner. There is no specific constitutional remedy because it's an otherwise secular constitution in several ways. It's actually a mixed bag in that sense. But all remedies available to civil litigants or even criminal litigants for this matter, because the very first criminal complaint was filed in 1850 in the context of Random. Today, what has happened is, despite those constitutionally sanctioned remedies available, you have a legislation that says, I'm taking away these remedies only in this context. That is the problem with the Places of Worship Act. That I could have fought for encroachment of my private property by my neighbor or anybody else, but I don't have the right to fight for reclamation of my religious property, the abode of my deity, the kshetra, whatsoever. That is the unconstitutionality and the problem, the civilizational issues with the Places of Worship. You don't need any esoteric solutions or constitutional amendments for this. At the very least, repeal this legislation, allow us to prove our case, and we do it. If the state does not want to go through the rigmarole of passing a legislation that facilitates reclamation without litigation and appoints a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, then at least allow us to do this. The problem is the state does not want to do it. Plus, there is a state-imposed fetter such as the Places of Worship Act, which takes away whatever little remedy was available to us. That's the problem with the entire situation.
नमस्ते सर, आप अभी सबरीमाला में भी जैसे आपने जब कंटेस्ट किया, तो जहाँ तक मुझे ध्यान है, आप मुझे करेक्ट करिएगा अगर मैं गलत बोल रहा हूँ, कि जो डेटी है वो अपने आप में एक तरह से उसमें केस में फाइट कर रहे थे, मतलब डेटी के नाम पे, ऐसा था क्या? या वो रामलला में था? अर्जुन आनंद मेरा नाम है। तो जब हम ऐसी बात करते हैं, जब देवता स्वयं जो है वो कोर्ट में जा रहा है एज अ पर्सन, तो that transcends the boundaries of historicity in the strict sense. मतलब वो हो सकता है पौराणिक सेंस ऑफ द पास्ट में वो फिट हो रहा हो, परंतु वो हिस्ट्री में फिट नहीं हो रहा है। अब अगर हम उस सेंस में देख रहे हैं, तो इंडियन स्टेट अभी तक, खास करके जुडिशरी पे अगर हम फोकस करें, उस प्रश्न को किस तरह से लेता है, क्योंकि वो ना साइंटिफिकली कोट अनकोट हिस्ट्री है और रैशनल सेंस में तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं है, तो उसको कैसे लेते हैं?
तो ये जो अभी 9 जज का जो हियरिंग चल रहा है सुप्रीम कोर्ट के सामने, सर्वोच्च न्यायालय के सामने, इसी मुद्दे पे है कि सेक्युलर रैशनैलिटी एंड स्पिरिचुअलिटी का कोई तालमेल नहीं है और एक को आप दूसरे के मापदंड से माप नहीं सकते या तोड़ नहीं सकते। यही सवाल या यही प्रश्न खड़ा हो जाता है। एंड फॉर्चुनेटली अब तक जो समझ में आ रहा है, ये जो मुद्दा 54 में या फिर 56 में इसको उठाना चाहिए था, फाइनली रेजिंग इट आफ्टर 60-70 इयर्स, एंड आई कैन कॉन्फिडेंटली टेल यू इससे बेहतर चीज नहीं हो सकता। क्योंकि जो सवाल आपने किया कि आप सेक्युलर हिस्ट्री को कैसे एक आस्था के मुद्दे पे या उस इश्यू पे कैसे आप उसको इम्पोज कर सकते हैं, ये सवाल यही सेंट्रल सवाल है। Which is why राम जन्मभूमि as a judgment does two things. वो एविडेंस ऑफ डिस्ट्रक्शन और एक्सिस्टेंस ऑफ टेम्पल के लिए सेक्युलर हिस्ट्री की बात करता है और सेक्युलर एविडेंस की बात करता है। लेकिन अनदर कॉम्पोनेंट इज टू से भाई यहाँ पे आस्था भी तो है, और आस्था के लिए हम वी विल ओनली गो बाय द बिलीफ ऑफ द। तो अगर मैंने ये प्रूव कर दिया कि मंदिर जो है ये श्री राम के लिए था और हमारा ये मानना है कि श्री राम यहाँ पे पैदा हुए थे, उनका जन्म यहाँ पे हुआ था, तो कोर्ट सिर्फ ये पूछ सकती है एटलीस्ट ये तो प्रूव कीजिए कि आपके मंदिर था। लेकिन कोर्ट हमसे ये नहीं पूछ सकती है अब ये प्रूफ कीजिए कि श्री राम यहीं पे पैदा हुआ, क्योंकि वो आस्था की बात है। तो राम जन्मभूमि पहले मुद्दे पे सबूत के बेसिस पे या आधारों के बेसिस पे एक कंक्लूजन पे आता है कि हाँ वहां पे मंदिर है, और उसके बाद ये कहता है कि लोगों का ये मानना है कि राम जन्मभूमि है, तो इसके ऊपर कोई प्रश्न नहीं उठ सकता। That is one of the good things about the Ram Janmabhoomi judgment, which answers the question partly that matters of faith cannot be tested, matters of history can be tested, and temple reclamation is combination of both matter of faith and history. Existence of temple is a matter of history. The existence of a deity within that is a matter of faith. So nobody is questioning. तो एक्चुअली अगर आप देखेंगे 2014 से पहले जब इस सरकार के पहले पिछली सरकार में ये भी पूछा जा रहा था कि आप प्रूफ कीजिए कि राम यहीं पे जन्मे, करुणानिधि ने यही पूछा था, एंड सोनिया गांधी की सरकार ने भी यही सवाल पूछा। इनफैक्ट एफिडेविट्स फाइल करने के लिए बोला गया। श्री पराशरन के एल्डेस्ट सन ने अपने पोजीशन को त्याग दिया जब उनसे कहा जा रहा था कि आप कि राम सेतु नाम का कोई चीज हो नहीं सकता, ये किसी ने कंस्ट्रक्ट नहीं किया, ये नेचुरल फॉर्मेशन है। जब उनसे ये कहा जा रहा था, उन्होंने त्याग पत्र दे दिया। दैट इज द लेगेसी ऑफ द फैमिली। He decided to give up his position as the ASG because he was being asked to file an affidavit that was contrary to his faith. Because ultimately his father was fighting for Sri Ram. Fortunately, politically as well as judicially, there is a perceptible shift on these subjects, which is a welcome change. Trust me, it is such a welcome change. It's possible for us to make a point of view to a receptive audience. वरना आपको माथा पटक पटक के आपको बोलना पड़ता है, ये कैसे हो सकता है? Finally, you are able to make an argument which is being received. Next.
Hello, sir. My name is Rasika.
Yes.
So before you, Dr. Ranganathan in his talk mentioned the Waqf Board and the Waqf Act, and he mentioned how the Act weaponizes the board. So do you see that there is a legal way in the future that this Act can not only be amended, which it has been, but can be abrogated or can be amended in a way that will be beneficial for us?
See, the point is, the state has the power to roll back a legislation just as it has rolled back the farm laws. तो वक्फ का जो legislation है, इसको roll back करने पे कोई challenge नहीं हो सकता. Nobody can go to the court and say that to roll back the Waqf Act is an unconstitutional act and therefore that act should be challenged. How is that even possible? The state always has the power to roll it back. It's unfortunate that we are trying to look for band-aid fixes as opposed to rolling back the entire legislation. क्योंकि तब बात नए सिरे से शुरू होगी. Then we'll ask, first question that will be asked is, why does this, how does one justify the existence of this legislation exclusively in favor of one community? What happens to the rights of other communities? Especially when this legislation facilitates the encroachment of rights and property of one community by another. Because the Waqf Act is not an internal legislation, which means उसका impact सिर्फ एक community के अंदर सीमित नहीं, ये बाहर के लोगों को भी impact कर रहा है. And when such a thing is happening, why would I want to sit and amend it? I'd say hit reset. Hit reset. Let's go back to factory settings and see what is the nature of this. Why do we need this? Because the existence of endowment legislations or even trust act, who already have the sabse लागू हो सकते हैं. If you truly want to come out with a legislation that governs endowments, come out with a central legislation or a uniform legislation, taking into account the practices of Hindus, Muslims, Christians. You can still do it, but at least we will know how to. We'll actually see whether it's equally applicable to everyone, and does it create justice and injustice for everyone equally. Waqf Act is a textbook instance of legislative exceptionalism, which is a reflection of minority exceptionalism, which is Indian state's policy since its inception. And the presence of the Places of Worship Act is a textbook case of secular discrimination of the Indian state. Because on the one hand, one gets to encroach, and on the other hand, I don't get to reclaim what is mine. And as Anand rightly puts it, we are burning from both sides. One is an example of appeasement and the other is an example of discrimination. Period. Next.
Thank you so much, Sai, for
two more questions.
Yeah, thank you so very much for giving us your time and for the very nuanced answer. While your presence is missed here in person, I think you assuaged that to a large extent by very kindly consenting to be with us online and giving us so much of your time so generously. On behalf of Raghavji and the entire audience here, we'd like to thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Har Mahadev, Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
I now invite Sri Raghav Krishna ji for his concluding remarks.
That's a long day. Shakespeare, I think, remarked once, how do you put another patch of white on what is perfect as snow? So I don't think we should follow too much after Sahitya Tak's tremendous presentation. But a quick reflection, I don't want to hold you guys back. Identity, stability, and prosperity. These are the eternal concerns, whether you are an individual or a nation or a civilization. All of our contestations, all of our aspirations, all of our anxieties are around these things. Now, there are a couple of narratives that the world gives you. The contemporary world tells you that you can become prosperous and then acquire your identity. Right? That's the way you look at an economic theory today. But the moment that we are in and the place that we are in tells you that identity is probably far more primal. And it is the coherence of identity that creates the stability. And it is stability that creates the ability for people to cohere, to actually exercise their collective enterprise and generate prosperity. So I think what we're doing here now today is a reflection of our collective aspiration to become stable and to cohere. And to do that, I know that it's been Vikramji's vision. And I had a couple of points around how we need to build systems, but I think the job was done by those people who answered. We need to look at this right from a school system to an economic system to an intellectual system to a legal system, what we call civilization. Ultimately, civilization is when you answer three questions, right? What is worth learning for human and planetary fulfillment? How do humans learn? And how do we transmit our learning so that intergenerationally there is a coherence between your parents, yourself, and your children, right? So we need to answer these questions, and we are a civilization because our ancestors have answered this question. So what we want to do here is not leave this as an event. We want to make sure that this is, I was just discussing with Vikramji, but while we would have wished that there is a larger participation, there was a crowd and there was some optics around it. But I think the real value of this intimacy, the fact that a few really committed scholars have come together, have listened to each other, have actually developed the ability to perhaps also deal with difference. All of these are critical reflexes and temperaments that we need to develop for any kind of substantial work that needs to happen. Now, both Vikramji and I are very, very keenly aware that the burden cannot be yours. Our job is to try and create the enabling environment. What we do together, what we do individually in our institutions, is to try and make sure that the cruel choice that we've given your generation, which is that you can either work for dharma or you can have artha, that you can either have a good life or you can work for dharma. We want to make sure that that cruel choice is not there anymore, right? So that is our job. What we want you to do is focus on learning. While there is a lot of reflection that we've had on the, on the cruelty, on the barbarianism, all of those are true, but it is also true of what happens when people are motivated, right? Whether it is religious motivation, whether it is adharmic motivation or dharmic motivation, it has to be met with that kind of resilience. And resilience is a function of psychological integrity. And we can create the safety, but the integrity of that has to come from an effort that is very, very deep and enduring. So I want to actually thank all of you for taking that first few steps. I've got to learn a lot being here today. I told you this in the morning itself, that the heroes of today are you. All of you who've taken the first step to actually come out and speak. It's not easy. The spaces that you inhabit, the kind of peer pressures that you would have. I understand, and both of us clearly understand that this is not easy. We want to create those safety spaces. We want to create the network, and we want to make sure that your work endures. And I'm thankful to Vikramji for conceptualizing this. Thank you for making Brhat a part of this. Thank you to the trust that enabled, for all of these things to come together. But most of all, thank you to all the scholars. Thank you for your effort, and thank you for your pursuit of knowledge. Thank you.